Welcome, I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. The first question I'd like to answer is, why should you learn how to light with lighting instruments in the studio? Nature does a great job of lighting things on her own, most times, but a lot of times you're going to be making portraits indoors, making portraits when the weather outside is bad, or even doing something after the sun's gone down. More importantly though, contrary to popular belief, lighting's not just about putting enough photons on somebody to get a usable photograph. Lighting and lights are tools to help you craft a more beautiful portrait. Light has a lot of properties, like the direction of light, hard light or soft light, the color temperature of light, and all these things come together to make beautiful portraits if you handle them correctly. So what we're going to do in this class is teach you the fundamentals of lighting portraits. We're going to teach you about the lighting instruments, how they work best, where to put them, how to choose them, and how to put together lighting designs that work for beautiful portraits. Now, lighting is not something that's necessarily rule by rule by rule. There's no standard, although there are ways photographers have been doing things for a long time, but we want to teach you the building blocks so that you can go on from there, so you can expand and create new ways of lighting that are unique to you and resonate with your artistic vision. Now, before we go there, I'd like to introduce myself. I've been a commercial photographer in Austin, Texas for over 25 years. And I've photographed lots of different things, but I'm always drawn back to the portrait. The portrait is the thing that brought me into photography, and it's the subject matter that keeps me interested. And that's because when you photograph objects like computers or routers, they don't entertain you, they don't talk back, they don't collaborate. People do. I've been doing this long enough so that I've had all kinds of great opportunities as a portrait photographer. I've written 5 books on photography. I've photographed 3 presidents. I've photographed a handful of A-list celebrities, but more importantly, I've photographed a lot of very interesting people, even people that aren't famous. And it's always been a wonderful experience for me because I get to drop in and share part of their lives. My whole philosophy as a portrait photographer is to try to use lights to make people look their best. I've got a selection of tools that I like to use to create my style. And in this video, I would like to teach you how to use the fundamental lighting tools to create your own style. Before we go any further, let's look at our cameras and lenses, because the selection and the choice of your camera, your lens, as a portrait photographer is going to make a lot of difference. Those are our core tools. So let's go ahead and take a look at which cameras and lenses I've selected to use as a portrait photographer. I'd like to talk about cameras and lenses. These are the core tools that we use as portrait photographers. Without a great camera and a lens, all the lighting doesn't really matter. I personally use a full frame camera. That's a large sensor that's like our old 35mm frame. And I use that because in conjunction with a longer lens and faster lens, I can limit depth of field, which means I can make my backgrounds or my foregrounds go out of focus while keeping my main subject, my sitter, in perfect focus. There are a lot of different cameras and lenses on the market, and there's kind of a prevailing mythology that you have to be well equipped to be a portrait photographer or professional photographer and have one of each lens, but nothing could be further from the truth. If you're a studio portrait photographer, you probably depend on one camera and one lens combination for 99% of what you do. For me, it's a full-frame digital camera, like this Sony A99, and a 70 to 210 millimeter zoom lens. Now, the 70 to 200 is a fabulous lens for a portrait photographer because it starts at kind of a telephoto focal length and then gets to a tighter and tighter telephoto focal length. You wouldn't use this kind of lens to do wide architectural shots or really big group shots because that's not what it's built for. It's built to come in and showcase a center subject and put all of the emphasis on that subject while dropping the foreground and the background out of focus. These lenses are available not just in the Sony line, but in Canon, Nikon, Pentax, and all the other major camera manufacturers. They're a little pricey, but you only have to buy them one time, and really you only need that one lens to be a portrait photographer. Now, there are other lenses available, and there's one other lens that I use all the time that I'd really like to show off. And again, every camera manufacturer should have one of these particular focal lengths in their catalog. This is an 85mm lens. In my point of view, if I'm shooting a portrait of a single person, it's just about the perfect focal length. When I'm standing about 6 feet away from someone, I can get a beautiful head and shoulders portrait of them using this kind of focal length without any sort of distortion. Now, you probably know this from looking at your own photographs, but if you take a wide angle photograph as a portrait of a person and you get too close, it distorts a person's facial features. If you get too far away and try to crop a lot, it flattens out their facial features. 85mm seems to be that perfect spot. Now this one has a really big front element, and that's because it's really fast. That means it has a large open aperture when it's wide open. Now the open aperture combined with that focal length gives you the ability to very, very tightly control depth of field. At f2 or f2.8, when you're focused on someone 6 feet away, their nose will be in focus, their eyes will be in focus, and by the time you get to the back of their ears, the focus starts to go away. When you hit the background, it's soft, you've knocked out details that might, basically conflict with the attention to your subject, and it just does a lot of nice stuff for you. I've had this one for a while. I also use it a lot in video because the apertures don't click, which is nice. Now, we hear a lot about full-frame cameras as portrait photographers, and here's my old school full-frame camera. They're really nice, and you can do your depth of field effects nicely, but the files are kind of huge, and they're big and heavy to carry around. A lot of people have been migrating to smaller camera systems. This camera is an APS-C mirrorless camera. It's got a smaller sensor on the inside, smaller lenses. The benefit of these cameras is that they're small and light and easy to use. Now, you'll have to do a little bit more work to narrow down your depth of field and use a little faster lens, but they're a perfectly good alternative to the traditional full-frame cameras. The essential thing to know about choosing cameras and lenses is you're going to have a focal length that really resonates to you. It's something you'll find as you get more experience under your belt doing portraits. But as you work, look at the metadata in your files and see which focal lengths you use most in your zoom lenses, and you'll pretty much see that if you're like I am as a portrait photographer, it's going to be between 85mm and 105mm. So a great zoom lens like this seems to be the right way to start. So now that we've looked at the cameras and lenses, let's go ahead and look at some photographs so that we can see what we'll be able to do with these tools and our lights. This is one of my all-time favorite portraits. This is my friend Anne. And when I did this portrait, I was experimenting. She was my assistant at the time. I said, "Anne, can you sit down in this chair while I try some lighting stuff?" And she said, "Oh yeah, sure." And I love the fact that her expression is so neutral, that she's so, she almost looks bored. But you rarely see that in a portrait, and I think it's just fabulous. Now, I used a big soft light, and it's coming in from the left, like right there. It's probably a 4-foot by 6-foot light with lots of layers of fabric in front of it for diffusion. And the other thing I really love about this portrait, not just the way the soft light comes across her face, but also the background. We put lots of different drapes in the background, so all through this area, all in the background, you can see this beautiful draping that falls out of focus. Each one of those drapes was lit individually so we could control the light levels on it. And then we did a little post-production to make the corners a little bit darker and more fun. But over the years, when I show a portfolio to people, this is the portrait that people turn to and go, "Oh, I love that." And I think part of it is that we captured a calmness that's nice. And that's kind of what I like in portraits. Now, photographers aren't immune from liking pictures of their own kids. This is my son, Ben, and I was experimenting with a new camera and some soft light, and actually I was using a tungsten light fixture instead of my usual flash. I like it because it's simple and straightforward. The light comes from the top left through a nice big lighting instrument, which makes the light very soft across his face. And I love the fact that we've got this beautiful triangle right here that's sometimes called a Rembrandt patch. And that lets a portrait photographer know that they've got their light really in the sweet spot. I've got a tiny little light on the background just to separate a little bit from Ben's shirt. And I don't know, it's one of my favorite portraits of Ben. I've shot a lot since, but there was something about the way he's looking with his eyes. We had just a good rapport that day, and I think that's part of the magic of being a portrait photographer. So that's my kid when he was about 11 years old. This is a portrait we shot recently, and I tried a different lighting style than what I usually do. And that's part of the fun of being a portrait photographer, is pulling out your lights and your camera and just experimenting, and just having fun with it. And that's some of the stuff that we'll be doing in the course. I've got a big soft light that's coming almost directly in front of her, and then a little slash of light on the background, almost like a steel blue light on the background. And it's a very calm portrait, straight in, but I like the way it drops off to the shadow areas on the side, because it really puts our attention right on the model's face. And I think that's critical when you're doing portraits of people. So there are two other things that I should mention about this particular portrait that I really like. One is the diagonal of her pose, the way her head's over to the side. So we're trying to pose people to get an effect, to make them look more elegant. The other thing is that we were able to position the light in such a way that we got a really beautiful shadow, a crisp shadow right under her chin that kind of boundaries her face. It gives you a nice border in there. The other thing I like about it is her hand position. It just seems natural to me. A lot of times you'll see a portrait where the hand position's not necessarily that natural. This is a portrait of a triathlete, and what I love about it is the crispness of the photograph. We were using one of my favorite lenses, and we were using a nice soft light from the left-hand side, and it does this beautiful little shadow right next to her nose, and a beautiful little triangle of light on her cheek, and then a nice dramatic shadow over to one side that gives us some modeling in her face. And what I used was a big umbrella. So we're going to showcase what umbrellas do and how to select the right one in the course. I love the way the light is over to the side, and it gives us a lot more texture of the little water drops on the goggles and the water drops on her face. I like the way her mouth is set there, just a little bit parted. You can see her teeth. I think it's a really nice effect. The other thing is that she's got those dark, luminous eyes, and we've got a big catch light right on the left-hand side of each eye, and that really makes the frame sparkle to me. And the catch lights are the reflection of your lighting instrument or your modifier in your portrait sitter's eyes. We'll talk about that later. I did this portrait for the Austin Lyric Opera, and what we wanted to do was have all of our focus and all of our emphasis on the subject in front of us and drop the background out entirely. So we used a really fast, longer lens with a very narrow depth of field, and if you look at this photograph, her eyes are in focus, her face is in focus, but by the time you get back to her hair, it's already falling out of focus. And all the things in the background, which I'm sure that day in the studio we were in, there were folding chairs and other things back there, the lens has put all those distractions out of focus. And I think that's a really important tool for photographers when they go to design their portraits, is the understanding of depth of field and how it affects the final portrait. So when we're doing portraits, we're always using one light or more for the front, but just as importantly, we use lights in the background for effect. Sometimes they're for separation, but sometimes they add a little bit more dynamic tension to the frame. If you see the light behind our person in this, it's almost like a little comet coming through the back. And I think it makes the portrait much more engaging than if it had been a solid color. So just another thing to think about. In this portrait, I was experimenting a lot with something we'll talk about in the course, and that's getting the light at just the right angle to the face to really sculpt it and show you the three-dimensionality of your model's face. If your light's too much in the center, you lose that kind of sculpting that makes a face really interesting and beautiful. So we've put our light, so it's coming from a top corner, about 45 degrees up and about 45 degrees to the side. We're seeing a beautiful triangle right through here with shadow to the other side. That lets me know I've put my light exactly in the right place, and we'll discuss that more. Another thing it does is put a beautiful shadow to accentuate the edge of her jaw so that it separates from the rest of her body and her neck. And it's a nice way to make a face look actually perfect and well composed. So we'll be talking about how to use the lights and how to position the lights further on. When we talk about studio lighting, we don't always have to do it in a real studio. This is a location, this is actually my dining room, and we were shooting a book cover here. So what we've done is use our studio lighting and use the ambient lighting at the same time. It's just an extrapolation of what we're going to teach in the program. We've got my typical light, which is a soft light coming from the left. We're getting that beautiful triangle right there, which I call the magic triangle. We're getting a great shadow to the side. The photo is very open, it's very colorful, it almost pops. And it's a wonderful contrast between the foreground and the background areas. But it seems, in some ways, kind of like a natural portrait of somebody just in their house. And you can use the techniques that we're going to talk about to do all kinds of things in and out of the studio. The basics of lighting are the important thing. And this is a great example of taking something you've learned in the studio and applying it to an environmental portrait. So you can see the catch lights in her eyes. You can see the beautiful shadow next to her nose. She's got a fabulous smile. And her pose is turned just a little to camera, one shoulder in, one shoulder down. And the background goes beautifully out of focus. That helps put a lot of attention on our key subject. I had her drop one shoulder and bring the other shoulder up a little bit because it helps to slim the profile, the body profile a little bit, and it's flattering. It's a flattering pose, especially when she drops her head toward the extended shoulder. I shot this portrait for medical practice. Medical practices are always looking for happy patients, happy outcomes, and so it was almost in a testimonial look. I positioned my subject in a makeshift studio. I've got a couple layers of background. I just hung some drapes on some poles in the background and then put lights on them. I've got my regular key light coming from the top left. It's pretty soft, it's pretty big. It gives me a really nice wash across his face. And I've got a little bit of foam core, just a foam core board to the opposite side over here. And what that's doing is taking the light that's coming across his face and not hitting it and bouncing back some fill light to the other side to fill in those shadows right there. I loved his natural position of putting his hand on his chin on his hand and then crossing over because it gives me a beautiful diagonal right in the middle of the frame, which is fabulous. And his look is relaxed, comfortable, and he really seems at ease in his environment there, which I think is great. I've let the light drop off in the corners, which is kind of a natural effect to keep putting emphasis back onto our subject. And altogether, it was just a fun and fabulous way to make a portrait. Now, the other thing I want to mention here is I actually used what I call a posing table. His arms are leaning on a little table in front of him. And it changes his posture a little bit, it relaxes him, and it gives him kind of a psychological support. And I think that anything we can do to make a portrait sitter more comfortable will give us a better portrait in the end. This is a portrait that incorporates a couple of different styles. It uses my favorite lighting style, which is a big soft light over to one side, but we've dropped down what we call the key. So this is more of a low-key portrait. We've kept the background dark. We've kept the shadows unfilled so that they're dark and more mysterious. And the direct look into the camera is just, for me, very riveting. And And you know, I think most people respond to a photograph where a model is looking directly into camera, or a subject, a portrait sitter is looking directly into camera. It creates a connection with the viewer that I think is very valuable. So we've got our beautiful soft light coming here from the side. We've got this beautiful dark shadow on this side of her face. We've got a nice little diagonal of where she stuck her arm up to just do something with her hair at an opportune time. The skin tones are beautifully soft, and we were using a lens with the aperture almost wide open. So when you get down here to her neck or the back of her collar, those areas go beautifully out of focus. By the time we hit our background back here, we see the background just drop into this beautiful creamy out of focus. And if you have too much texture and too much detail in the background, sometimes it can be a little bit, what do I want to say, distracting. In an upcoming lesson, we're going to talk about how to get this kind of low-key effect. Now, coming up, we're going to look at some of the characteristics of light, and we're going to try to demystify lighting. I'm going to teach you about hard light, soft light, the color temperature of light, how to get the perfect color balance so your skin tones look great, and a lot more. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. Welcome back. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. In this lesson, we're going to look at some of the properties of light that are universal, that work with every lighting instrument that we play with as photographers. And the two things that we're really going to cover are hard light and soft light. What can we do to make light mimic the soft light we can find in nature? And what can we do to color correct light to make sure that it works well in post-production and looks good for the purposes of our portraits? Let me start by introducing you to our model, Victoria. She's going to be helping me as I do some demos to show you some of the characteristics of light and some of the things that we're going to learn today. So what I'd like to do with Victoria here today is show you a couple of the concepts that affect lighting and by extension affect your portraits. There are two things that I'm really concerned about. One is the character of light. Is it hard light or soft light? And by hard light, I mean a light that's very angular and comes from a small source. I can do a demonstration for you, and what I'm going to do is turn on one of the hard lights that I have here on the set and see what it does. So, when we turn this on, you instantly see that Victoria's got hard shadows on her face. And a hard light goes a long way to accentuating the texture on people's faces. And you know that's not very flattering. So, what we're going to do, well, wait, before I do anything else, let me take a quick photograph so that we can reference it later. Aha. Oh my gosh. Not very flattering. Now, to correct this, or to change it, I'm going to go over and grab a diffusion screen. And a diffusion screen is just a white sheet, and it does what clouds do in nature. It blocks the direct sun and softens the light. So let me grab that, and we'll see how we can change this. Okay. Now I'm going to walk this right in and put it between the light source and move it in even a little bit more so it's nice and soft. So you can see that we have a lot of different ways that we can change the light characteristic and make it work for us as portrait artists. And this is one of the ways that we show the difference between hard and soft. Now wait just a second, I'm going to take a picture of this so we can discuss it later. Oh, much better. Beautiful. Okay, so now that I've shown you the difference between the hard light and the soft light, let's talk a little bit more about how you can configure them to get different effects. The rule of thumb is really that the larger the light source, the softer the light. And that's because the light can come from the front of our diffuser and wrap around to the other side of her face. When the light's coming from a smaller source, it tends to be more collimated or more straight line. And so it can't see around the corners like a larger diffuser. The other thing that's interesting about hard and soft light is the further back we move our diffusion from our model, the harder it gets. That's because the source becomes smaller and smaller relative to her face, and it makes the light a little bit harder. You can see it mostly in the shadow area, so transition from her nose to her cheek. So general rule of thumb is if you want a really soft light, you're going to use your diffuser as close as possible because that makes it really big in relation to the subject's face. When you want it a little bit harder, which you might want for an effect, you pull it back a little bit, and that's really cool too. So let me take a couple shots in this configuration so we can compare them with what we had before. So Victoria, if you look out here, that's great right there. And turn your face just a little that way. Beautiful. Okay, so this basically shows us just a little bit more hard edge to the shadow. We would call it a quicker shadow transfer. But what it essentially means is that you have a little bit more contrast in your subject's face. Now, I want to show you the way I would normally do this if I were looking for the most flattering light that I could devise with those two instruments. So what I'm going to do is grab my diffusion screen and I'm going to pull it in nice and close. I want to get it so close that I have to be mindful of where the edge of what the lens can see is. And I'm going to pull it as forward as I can because that'll help the light wrap around to the other side of Victoria's face. And then I'm going to bring my light and I'm going to pull it back a bit because even the most diffuse source allows a little bit of light to come straight through. So let me take a shot of this because I really like what we've got going on here. And that's the kind of lighting I like to make a soft facial transition and to make really beautiful portrait lighting. So if you remember nothing else, hard and soft, the harder the light, the smaller it is and the more concentrated it is. And additionally, the further away you get it, the harder it's going to be. For soft light, the kind of light that we like for portraits, you want to get a diffuser that's as big as you can get and get it in as close as you can because that's what's going to give you the softest light. And in almost any situation, the softest light is the most flattering light. So let me take one more shot just to make sure I've got it in the can. Turn into the light just a little bit. Let's turn your whole body just, yes, that nice little curve right there. Beautiful. And that's where we are with hard and soft. So what I'd like to do next is talk to you guys about color temperature and matching the colors in your image. So after we've got our lighting figured out, then we figure out the color. Every light out on the market today has a color temperature. Flash is a lot like daylight. In terms of overall balance, it's a little bit more blue. Tungsten lights, like the regular household bulbs you might use in your house, are a very warm light source. Now, cameras can automatically white balance for any one light source. But what happens if you mix light sources? I've set up a demonstration with Victoria, and I've got a tungsten light on her right now. My camera is set up and balanced for that tungsten light. It's a nice warm light source. So I'm going to take a picture of Victoria in that setup right now. That's perfect right there. Now I'm going to add a second light source from the other side. And this one is going to be balanced for daylight. And I think you'll immediately see the difference between the tungsten and the daylight balance. So let me do that. Wow. It's really blue on the other side. You can see it in the highlights in her hair. There's a lot of blue coming through, and that's a misbalance between our tungsten light and our daylight light. So let me grab a quick photograph of that so we can talk about it later. Wow. That's a huge difference. Now, if we try to correct for our daylight, we're going to turn the other side really orange. I'm going to go ahead and do that in camera just so I can have something to compare. I'm going to set my white balance for a sunny day exposure, and I'm going to take one quick picture. Could you move your hair just out of, yeah, oh yeah, right there and right into camera. That's perfect. And what I'm seeing is this side of her face, the daylight side of her face, is perfectly neutral when I have the camera set for daylight. But what I'm seeing on the other side of the face is a really warm tungsten effect. Now I'm going to correct it for the tungsten by changing my color balance on here. Wow, it's so easy on these cameras to do that. That's perfect right there. I'm going to grab another shot of Victoria. We can compare them later. That's nice. But now the daylight side is totally blue. So I guess the point I'm making is that when you select your lights, you have to make sure they match. Because when you go in to do a portrait, it's disconcerting to see parts of the photograph be one color balance and other parts be a different color balance. So if you're going to choose an electronic flash, you want to balance for that, but you want to have enough electronic flashes so that any additional light you add to your set matches the first light. So we've seen that it's pretty easy to match color temperature if you know what the color temperature of the light source is. If it's a flash, it's probably a daylight source. If it's tungsten, it's probably a 3200K source, and there'll be a little light bulb on the menu to show you. But what if you're working under a situation where the color temperature of the light's not a known commodity? Something like working under fluorescent lights, working with the new LED lights. In those situations, you'll need to do something called a custom white balance. It's not very hard, and every modern camera has one. But why would you want to do that when there's an auto white balance setting on your camera, and the camera can do this for you all automatically? Well, when you use auto white balance on a camera, anytime you zoom in or zoom out or move the camera or reframe or your model turns and changes in the light, the camera changes its color balance just a little bit, sometimes a lot. When you go into post-production after your portrait session and you're trying to make everything match, you're going to have to go through every single frame and color correct it. Now, if you set a custom white balance, you'll be able to set one balance, use it for all the frames, and if you do require some correction in post-production, you'll be able to make it one time and apply it globally to all your files. So let me show you how we do this. I've got Victoria sitting here under fluorescent lights that we're using to light up the video studio. I've turned off my photographic lights, and I'm going to take a quick shot of her, quick frame, under this lighting. Lighting like this can be really icky and really green, but I have a little tool, and it's called a gray card. Every camera likes to see some sort of gray balance that it can work with. You could use white, and if you're pressed for time and don't have one of these nifty little pop-up cards, you could even use a white sheet of paper. So the way we use it is to have our talent hold that in front of them in the same area that the regular light is striking her. We come back to the camera, access that white balance menu. Yeah. You'll come up with something that says set. Push your function button. And on the Sony camera, hold that up just a tiny bit more. We click one frame and we choose it. And all of a sudden, we've got a perfect white balance. No hue changes, no color temperature changes, and a lot less work to do in post-production. That's why you want to use a custom white balance. I even custom white balance when I'm shooting with flash or tungsten, because as those instruments age, they can have slightly different color temperatures. I want to make sure I'm as close to optimum as I can possibly get. Now that we've got this set up and we've got a perfect white balance, I'm going to go ahead and take a few more shots so we have something to compare with. Wow, that color is so much prettier. Now, let me tell you just a few more things about doing a white balance. Some of you might wonder why we have a white side and a gray side. Certain cameras white balance more accurately to white, and some are more accurate with gray. I use the gray side because a lot of times when I'm shooting, not just in the studio but in general, I'm using one of the auto exposure modes like aperture priority. If I take a white card reading with aperture preferred priority, the camera's always trying to make this white 18% gray. And the only way it can do that is by automatically stopping down almost 2 stops. But when you stop down 2 stops and make this darker, you introduce some color non-linearities. So color shifts a little bit in certain color spectrums. So your red might get a little bit out of whack, or your blue might get a little bit out of whack, and that kind of defeats the purpose of doing a really good auto white balance. So what I always do is use the gray side. It doesn't change my exposure when I put it into the scene the way white would, and it gives me a more accurate balance. If you're going to use the white side of the card, you might want to remember to switch to manual exposure, take your exposure reading of your subject, then introduce the white card, and without changing any of your exposure settings, make your white balance. For me, the gray is always easier. And added bonus, since it's gray, if it reads perfect gray in the camera, I know I've got my exposure set right too. Now let's go and review some of the images that we've taken in this session and see what we've done. See what's happened with the color balance and see what's happened with our custom white balance up close and in more detail. I think it's a good time to sit here and look at some of the stuff that we took in this lesson and really kind of jump a little deeper into it. So this is the first shot that we took of Victoria under just our studio work lights. So these are the lights that we had set up to do our video program. And I'm going to walk through and show you a few things. This is pretty flat lighting on Victoria. It doesn't show off her cheekbones, it doesn't add a lot of sparkle to her face, and it's pretty flat. So I'm going to move to another image. There we go. There we are. So this is our first lit shot. And this is the one that we used one single bare tungsten light on. And what I want to really get your attention to are the highlights that are burning out here, 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 and here, which are a result of having that really small light source, that really hard light source. It gives you more of what we would call a specular highlight. There's really no detail in there, and that'll mess us up when we go to retouch. So we're not very happy about that. So going back to it, we looked at our specular highlights. And one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize was how strong the shadows are. Because that transition from highlight to shadow is what gives us the feeling of an image being too contrasty or having too much contrast in it. And it makes a wicked shadow area right through there that's not flattering at all. So you've got your specular highlights, you've got your non-flattering shadows, and then look what happens when we blow this thing up. The angle of the light, coupled with how hard that light source is, brought out all of the pores and the texture and the other things that we don't really want to see in a beautiful model's face, even on her forehead. So this image is our basic shot of hard lighting. It shows us everything that we don't want to do as a photographer. Let's move on and show you what happened when we added the diffusion scrim. The biggest thing you'll notice when we go to the image with the diffuser is how much nicer the shadow area looks. The transition is very smooth through here. It models her face nicely, and it gives more an effect that you want in a portrait. We've also subdued those specular highlights. They now have detail in them. They're going to be much easier for you to retouch, and the speculars on her forehead are almost entirely gone. That's our first step. And all we did to get from our hard shadow to this was to leave the light in exactly the same place, but introduce a diffusion scrim, or a white sheet, that allowed the light to be diffused as it came through. This is a much more elegant way to light the portrait. So this is the shot that we took after we moved the diffusion scrim and the light a little further back. And I think if you'll look through this area, you'll see that the transition's gotten a little bit harder, but we still have a nice balance between hard and soft in this particular photograph. So a lot of what you do with hard and soft light and the way you use diffusion scrims or other modifiers is almost like cooking. You have to salt to your own taste. And for a lot of uses, this transition might be the best one for your aesthetic use. It bothers me to see this nose shadow there so prominently, and I'm going to blow that up so you guys can see that. Now let's look at them side by side so you can really see the difference between our shot where we use the diffuser in close and the shot where we move the diffuser back further away. I think you'll be able to see the differences a lot easier this way. The one on the left is our close shot, so I'm going to write close on that. And if you look at that shot, you see the transition between the shadows and the highlights through this area is a lot smoother than the shadows to highlights in this photograph. And that's all a function of how far the diffuser was from my model. The further you put your diffusion, or the further you put your light source away from your model, the harder the light's going to be. Now, there's not anything wrong with the image on the right. In fact, if you were looking for a snappier feel to the portrait, this might be a really good starting point. Or if you're going to do a lot of post-production to it, softening the skin, etc., you might want to start with a contrastier file. All of these are just tool sets that allow you to make an image that matches the aesthetic that you want. There are no rules or regulations about how your lighting should be set up. It's all a matter of taste, like salting food. So these side by side should give you a great comparison between the two. And one of the things that I would like to point out is the catch lights that show up in people's eyes, right there, the bright spot. And a catch light is basically a reflection of whatever your light source was. Now, the catch lights on our photograph close, and I'm going to remark that close, are really big. And that's a result of having our diffuser in close. And you remember me telling you that the closer the diffuser, the bigger the apparent size of the light source. It's pretty cool. If you look at the catch lights on our photograph where the diffuser was moved further away, you'll see that there are much smaller catch lights. And that will show you that we've moved that diffuser back, reducing its apparent size. So when we look between the two photographs, we can see right off the bat that the larger the catch lights in the eyes, the softer that transition to the shadows, and the more open the shadows are. It's a more natural feel. In the other photograph, it's contrastier. You can even see that the edges of the catch lights are contrastier than the ones on the left. And that really sets the field to be more contrasty. And that's what we've got in these two photographs. They're very close, but when you start looking at them, there's a huge difference in style between the two. These are just tools. Sometimes you'll want a photograph that's contrastier. If you're taking a photograph, a portrait, and going into post-production where you're softening the skin or softening edges, things like that, you may find that you want a little additional contrast to start with because the post-processing will eliminate some of the contrast. If you're using the photograph straight out of camera, you might want them more like the image on the left, more open already without your post-processing. They're just tools in your tool bag at that point. Now that we've figured out the balance between soft light and hard light, let's move on to the color work we did right afterwards. What we have on the screen right now is our first image. It's the one where we have a neutral, we're set on tungsten white balance, and we have a neutral feel for Victoria's cheek over here and her forehead. These were both lit by our tungsten light source, and we've got a daylight source coming in from the opposite side. And the daylight source, because it's not the same balance as the tungsten source, is giving us this really blue coloration to that side of her face. And if you look in here, it's almost purple where it blends. And that's not satisfactory for a good studio lit portrait. So now let's go to another photograph. It's the one where we were balanced for daylight, and let's see how different that looks. And what's happening here is the daylight side is correct, and now the tungsten side is totally off. That's because our balance is for daylight. The daylight light is coming from the right-hand side of the frame. That cheek is perfectly color matched to daylight, but then the cheek on the other side is not. So this is a perfect example of why you don't want to mix your light sources when you're doing studio portrait lighting. And there's really no way to correct both of those things at once. You have to choose one or the other and make all your light sources consistent. If you're going to shoot with a tungsten light source, you're going to shoot with a tungsten light balance, and you're not going to use daylight fixtures. The same applies vice versa. Everybody got that? So now we're going to move on to the custom white balance. This is Victoria under fluorescent lights. We didn't know what the color temperature was. There wasn't a preset for those that would be absolutely accurate. And you can see massive amounts of green coloration in her skin, which is not something you want in a portrait. It's also turned our background cyan. So that's where we started, and what we did was do our custom white balance, and let's look at the difference when we click into our custom white balance. Wow, that's amazing. The skin tones are absolutely neutral. The background is neutral. Even the coloration in the shadows is fabulous. And all it took was a 3-step color correction that's called a custom white balance. Wow, I really like the way this turned out. It's a combination of the soft diffuse lighting and perfect color balance. In our next lesson, we're going to learn how to add in the lights that we need to do perfect portrait work, one light at a time. We're going to start with one light, we're going to add a second light, a third light, and then a fourth light to show you how we build a portrait lighting design. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. Hi, welcome back. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to set up the lights to do a portrait. And what we're going to do is start with our main light. Now, I have always liked to bring a main light in at a 45-degree angle from my subject and about 45 degrees up. Those are just numbers, so I'm going to pull a light in and show you what I mean. So I'm going to pull my light in here. It's about at a 45-degree angle to the lens, and it's got to go up just a little bit more to be 45 degrees up, just like that. When I've got my first light set, I want to come back to the camera and test it. So I'm going to take a photograph of Victoria now and see what we get. Hi, Victoria. So the main light is going to be your key light. It's the one light that sets the rest of the set. In fact, if you only have one light, this is where you're going to want to position it. About 45 degrees up, because that's kind of the direction where pleasing sunlight in nature comes from, and about 45 degrees off angle to the camera, because it helps to model her face, the light coming across. The main light that I'm using today is an electronic flash, and you can see a continuous light source coming from the front of the electronic flash. That's called a modeling light. It's a little household light bulb in there that just shows us what the effect of the light will be after the flash goes off. Now, when I look at the image, I'm seeing that the area that's not lit by the flash, the area on the other side, is a little dark. It's got some shadows in there, and I'd like to take those down. Actually, I'd like to bring those up, and I'd like to do it by adding another light source. But I think this one will surprise you a little bit. So let me grab it. And here's my surprise light. It's actually a piece of white foam core. You can get it anywhere. And it's inexpensive, but what it does basically is take the photons, the light source from that light over there, our main light, and bounce them back into the shadow side of her face. I'm going to position it. That's great right there. And the reason I'm adding that light is to fill in some of the shadows to the other side. It's a big source, so it's really soft. And if you'll notice, I don't have the main light pointed straight at Victoria. I have it feathered a little to the front. So a lot of the light is coming directly from the main light, hitting the board, and bouncing back. Now what that does is fill in more detail in our shadow areas and keep the photograph from being too dark. It also fills in some of the texture on her face, so that it makes her skin look smoother. So let's go ahead and grab a frame and see how it works. That looks good. Victoria, can I turn you just a little? Yeah, right there. You know your fill light set perfectly when you can see into the shadows, but the shadows are still there. So we've got this set up. We've got our main light giving her the main light, modeling her cheeks, and then we've got the rest of the light bouncing off this. What I'd like to do at this point is add a background light, because I want to separate her from that background, and I want to give it a little bit more pizzazz. This is my background light. It's the same kind of light I'm using for my main light. It's an electronic flash, and I'm using it to get a little bit of separation on the background, which will come in handy, I think, especially with her black shirt. Now, I've got something special on the front of this light. It's a grid. It's a grid spot. It's a little metal thing that looks like a bunch of cut-off drinking straws. And the neat thing about it is that it'll give me a nice soft circle of light. And by soft, I mean soft edges on that light, which will give me a nice effect on the background without calling too much attention to itself. So I'm going to go ahead and position that light right now. And that's a good spot for it. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit, right about there. And let's see what we've done. Now, before I take this test shot, I want to tell you that I've got the electronic flashes set up with a radio trigger. Now, every time you shoot an electronic flash, something has to trigger the flash. We used to use big cables, and they would fail all the time, probably when you least wanted them to fail. But now we use radio slaves. They're very reliable. They don't take much battery power, and I can trigger as many lights as I have slaves for. And slaves are just the radio receivers that are on the other end. So let's go ahead and try this. We'll make sure our backlight goes off, our main light's doing what it's supposed to do, and everything triggers. So, hi Victoria. That's great right there, that smile. So, now we've got our lighting about 75% of the way there. I'm going to do a few little tweaks, but what I want to do next is add what we would call an accent light. An accent light comes from the back of the set. It can be the same kind of light that I've used in the main light or the background light. It's an electronic flash. And I can either use it to showcase her hair, to separate her hair, or I can use it as what we call a kicker light, which just kind of lights up the edges of her from the background. I'm going to do kind of a modified version of that that works perfectly for both the hair and the shoulders and the background. So I'm going to go ahead and place that fourth light. And I'm going to position it right about here. Now, the background light helps me separate her dark hair and her dark shirt from the background. So let's see if I've got that background light positioned correctly. I'm going to take a shot and we'll see what we get. Wow. I've been lighting in modified setups like this for years, and there's always a way to make it work with a different modifier or a second light as a fill light, but this is a basic standard that you can use day to day. I want to show you one more setup. Now, we've walked through the places that you'd put a main light, a fill light, a background light, and also a hair or an accent light. But what if you find yourself with just one lighting instrument and you really want to get that effect? Well, if you've learned all the things that we've taught you in terms of the step-by-steps, you might be able to pull this off with just one light, and I'm going to show you how. First of all, we put up one diffusion screen right here to take our main light and diffuse it so it's nice and soft for Victoria's face. But what I've done is I've pushed the main light back a little bit so part of it spills over the front of our diffusion screen right here, and it hits the foam core panel directly. And it gives us a nice fill light that's strong enough to really fill in the shadows on Victoria. Then we've let some of the light fall off the back of the scrim here so that it hits our background and lights the background beautifully. Finally, we've actually stuck a mirror up in the background to take the place of our traditional hair light or accent light. And whether you're using a mirror or an actual lighting instrument, what you want to do is get that up pretty high so that you can catch the light and bring it down over the top of your subject. You're trying to pull it in as close as you can to your subject, but still have it out of the frame. So when you bring all these things together and you've got the light bouncing in all the right places, I think we'll be able to make a beautiful shot that gives you a main light, a fill light, a background light, and a hair light using only one instrument. Let's go ahead and take a couple shots and see what we get. That's perfect right there, Victoria, if you'll turn just a little. And what I'm seeing is a beautiful triangle on her cheek right there of light. So you get a little shadow from the nose, and it's giving me what I call the magical triangle, which lets me know that my main light's in the right position. When I look at the file, I am seeing a perfect amount of fill light from the foam core, and the foam core is so nice and soft. It's kicking back light that's just incredibly neutral, which I like. So altogether, using only one light, using a diffuser, a reflector that's made out of foam core, and a mirror, we can almost replicate exactly what we learned with 3 lights and a panel of foam core. And I think that's pretty cool. Let's look at some of the stuff we shot and go into a little bit more detail about what we accomplished with the lighting. So this first image is the one that we shot that's just our key light through a diffuser, and it was the first step in setting up our 4-light setup. The light is nice and soft because it came through the diffuser, but we still have some fairly deep shadow over on this part, and the shadows around her cheek are pretty deep as well. So what I'd like to do is go to the shot where we added the fill card and show you the difference. So this is our second shot, and we've added the fill card over to the right-hand side of the frame, and you can see that it's opening up the shadows on the side compared to our other photograph, and it's bringing in some shadow detail on the hair and over on her right shoulder as well. So what it's doing is lowering the overall contrast on the image and getting us into a better ballpark where we could actually print this, or it would work well on a monitor screen. So we brought up our third photograph, which is the point at which we added the background light. So you can see that we've got a good separation with the background in our model there and over on this side. Probably fine-tune this a little bit and move that spot over so it's directly behind our model. Now you notice we've got the fill working really well. We see a lot of detail in the shadows on her hair through here. The fill card has also filled in shadow areas on the side of her face, the side of her neck. Wow, so how cool is this? We've got all 4 of our variations of the lighting up on the screen, and let's walk through them one at a time and see what we did. Now on the first one in the top left-hand corner, we've got the deeper shadows here and here, and what we did was go in there and fill those shadows in our second shot. So you can see right in there where we open up the shadows vis-a-vis this picture. Then we come down here and we've added a hair light, which you can see right there. Looks gorgeous. And then the final shot, we've got our main light, our fill light, which is doing a great job, the hair light back here, and our background light. And that pulls the whole photograph together and makes it work. It's fun to build lighting like this, and it's fun to see the results kind of progress and evolve. So these are the basic ways that I like to light things, and you know, I'd really like to see what you can do with some of these lighting techniques. And if you'd like to post them on the Craftsy platform, you can share them with all of us, and we'll all learn together. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to discuss all the different kinds of lighting equipment, the different lights like electronic flash and whatnot, that you can use to make beautiful portraits. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. Welcome back. I'm Kirk Tuck, and we're talking about Studio Portrait Lighting. I'd like to talk to you about the actual tools that we use to make light, our lights, and kind of walk you through the selections, because there are a lot of options that you could take to do Studio Portrait Lighting. The most common and basically the beginner motif is the on-camera flash. I've got one in my hand. This one fits on a Sony, but there are tons out there. They take batteries, and you can stick them on the hot shoe of your flash. Now, this flash is a little bit limiting because it takes batteries, and if you're shooting in a studio and you're making portraits, you're probably making hundreds and hundreds of exposures in a day. Well, the batteries keep wearing out, and you'll keep having to change them, and the flash recycles much slower than a conventional studio flash would. They also have a tendency to overheat if you flash them over and over and over again. But they're great little lights, and they're a wonderful thing to start with. If you're going to use these as your primary lights in the studio, you'll need a way to trigger them from your camera. So you can add a radio slave or a radio trigger to these and use as many as you want in the studio. The biggest problem, though, is that they tend to get expensive. This particular model for the Sony is about $600. And for the same investment, you end up with 2 conventional studio flashes. So let me show you those. This is a little flash from a Swiss company called Elinchrom, and it plugs into the wall. That's the major difference between the portable flashes and this. I want to show you something on the front end, though. There's a little circular flash tube that goes off when your camera's synced up and ready. Let me go ahead and turn it on. So when this light lights up, we can push one button in the back, and the flash goes off. Now, there's a light bulb here. It's a conventional household light bulb, and that's what's called a modeling light. It's just there to show you what the effect of the flash will be, which is pretty handy. So if you've got this pointing into a modifier, like an umbrella or a softbox, and you're in a studio where the lights are down, you'll be able to see a good approximation of what that light is going to do when it goes off. Now, the problem with the little battery-operated flashes is that there is no modeling light. So every time you push the button, you're going to have to review the screen on the back of your camera to know what you've got. That's a tough way to build a lighting design. So let's walk through this. The neat thing about a AC plug-in-the-wall studio flash is that you can flash it, flash it, flash it, and it recycles, no problems. On the back, I've got a range of controls, and one of them is the ability to raise or lower the power of the flash from the flash unit. So these things are more powerful than our conventional battery-operated flashes, and I think that's very useful when you're putting them through lots of diffusion or you're using big modifiers. You can control the modeling light. You can turn it off, which is practical in a lot of situations when you don't need it. You can do it as a ratio to the power of the flash, so that when I turn the power up and down, you can see that the light dims or comes back up based on the power of the flash. That ratio helps you use multiple units and be able to see what the effective difference between 2 units at 2 different power levels might be. Now, the flashes have to be triggered, and that's one of the other issues when you're using flash with your camera. Somehow you've got to tether it, either with radio signals or with a conventional wire. So in the last 10 years or so, radio triggers have become widely available, and they're very inexpensive. We use one part of the radio trigger set on the flash right here, and we stick another radio trigger device in the hot shoe of our camera. And every time we press the shutter, it fires our flash. There's still some uses in situations where you have fast-moving subjects. If I were a photographer who specialized in fast-moving small toddlers, I'd probably use flash to freeze their motion in the studio. And if you do a lot of work outdoors with your photography, which is kind of out of the purview of studio lighting, but if you do the outdoor work, it's one of the only lights that will allow you to synchronize with sunlight. So there are some residual benefits to using flash. What I'm finding out, though, is that a big trend for both portrait photographers and advertising photographers is to incorporate video into their bag of tricks. So a lot of people are doing video add-ons to portraiture, nice little clips that you can put out there on your V cards or your email. And we're starting to see more people embrace video. Most of the cameras you buy now have built-in HD video. And you can't use an intermittent flash to do video. So what's happening in the lighting realm, the lighting niche in our industry, is that more and more people are going to continuous light sources. And we're going to talk about that next. Now let's talk about continuous lighting. And at the outset, I'd like to say I'm a big fan of continuous lighting. Using continuous light sources means that we get to basically see what we're lighting while we're lighting it. There's an instant feedback loop, and it makes it so much easier for me to do beautiful portrait lighting. What I'd like to talk about first are what we call hot lights. Hot lights were pretty much the grandfather lights of our industry. They're just basically electric light bulbs. And we've got some rudimentary ones, like this little utility reflector with a standard household bulb in it. It's just like that modeling light that we used on the electronic flash. You plug it into the wall, it's the same one you would have in a household lamp. These are really fun to work with if you're trying to match the light that's in a house and you're matching other light bulbs, because the color temperature is the same as most of the lights that you'll have in a typical house. The problem with hot lights is that they get hot. That's why we call them hot lights. You've probably burned yourself changing a light bulb, and you know that they can heat up pretty quickly. But they're very, very inexpensive. A reflector like this at a hardware store will run you between $10 and $20. You know how much light bulbs cost. And you can actually do a lot with them if you're cognizant of always making a good white balance, a custom white balance. You'll find that they match things pretty well. This is the early hot light. The movie industry spent the last 50 years perfecting the hot light, and they've come up with instruments like this one, which is from a company called Aeroflex. It uses a tungsten light bulb, the same basic format, the same basic technology as the other, but it's in a housing that is cooled. The tungsten light bulb in there runs at a constant 3200 degree Kelvin temperature, and the color temperature is usually very, very accurate. And these are widely used on movie sets. This particular light is what we call a Fresnel spot, and it has a little lens on the front and an attachment on the back that allows you to spot in the light source. Just narrow it down so that you can concentrate on whatever's in your scene and have everything else go a little bit darker. If you notice, the Fresnel light source gives you a really beautiful soft edge to your light, which is why they still use these widespread in movies and on television sets. So you can see the difference between a wide setting on the optical setup and a tight setting. There's one more thing that most lights that were designed for movie and TV have, and that's the ability to use barn doors. Now, barn doors are just these metal things on the front. I guess they call them barn doors because they look like barn doors. And we can shape the light with them by closing them. And in some situations, we can just throw a narrow beam of light on something and pull our attention to what's lit by that narrow beam. I'm going to flesh out a little bit. And we've got what we call a little slash of light on there. And you can do all kinds of cool little theatrical things in your backgrounds when you're doing portraits. That slash of light could just add a little bit of dynamic tension to your background if you're using it. These lights do heat up though, and any light that uses a tungsten light bulb or a regular household light bulb, we're going to call a hot light, and we're calling them that because the temperature gets excessive. I wouldn't touch this without gloves after it's been on for 5 minutes or so. So that's basically the grandfather of all lighting for studio portraits and for things like video. But we can do much better. With modern technology, we've got things like fluorescent lights with electronic ballasts that run nicely. This is a standard video version of a fluorescent light, almost the same kind of lights that you would see in somebody's house or an office space, but with an electronic ballast, they don't flicker, and they put out an even light. And the newest generation of fluorescent tubes give us a very consistent color temperature all the way through. So they're not your father's fluorescents. These things are a bit more modern. The benefit of these is that they put out a lot of nice soft light, and they do it without generating very much heat. So let me spin this thing around and we'll show you what they do on this background. As you can see, the light's really soft, and it spreads throughout our background scene here, which is really great. I can stick my hand right on the tubes, and I'm not getting any of the discomfort that I had when I touched that barn door on our hot light. The fluorescents are in widespread use in video studios, but because so many people are becoming interested in video with their still cameras, a lot of people are adapting these. These are not very expensive to buy. They don't take very much power out of your wall sockets. And in fact, we are using fluorescent lights in the studio to film this sequence. So the detraction, or the downside of fluorescence, is basically just their size. You can see that they're a lot bigger than the lights we were using previously, and they're kind of bulky. They have to be because the tubes are big. And the benefit of having the big tubes is softer light. It's a bigger, softer source. So we really like fluorescent lights. They come in lots of different sizes for photography applications and video applications. They run cool. They don't match daylight exactly, but you can filter them to get really close. And in a studio where you're concerned about heat, temperature, and electrical use, these things are fabulous. As cool as fluorescents are, pun intended, the one thing about fluorescents that kind of makes them tough for people who move their lights around a lot is that the tubes are still very fragile. They're glass tubes. Now, there's a new light, and a lot of people are really excited about it. It's LED lighting. And LEDs are little semiconductors that make light when voltage goes across their surface. Probably more information than I need to give, but LEDs are wonderful because, being semiconductor products, they're really rugged and really reliable. An LED light bulb will give you something like 100,000 hours of life. So, some really smart people started building LED lights for the film and video industry, and now photographers are starting to adapt these lights and use them in their studios. They have a lot of the same benefits of fluorescents in that they're very, very efficient to operate, and they're very cool when they're on. This is a particular model called a light panel, and we've got a filter on the front so that it matches some of the other lights in the studio, but they are available in tungsten balance or daylight balance, and they can be very, very accurate. There are 1,000 little LED light bulbs on the front surface. Each individual light bulb doesn't put out that much power, but when you put 1,000 together in a small space, you really do get some kick. Let me go ahead and turn this around, and we'll point it at our camera again and show you what the light looks like. Wow. There's a dimmer on the back so that you can dim these lights down. And unlike hot lights, which when you dim them change color temperature, these don't change color temperature when you dim. So if you're using multiple LED fixtures, you could turn one down and turn one up and not really have to worry about the color balance at all. They run very cool. I can stick my hand on the front while it's operating with no problem whatsoever. And what that means in a small studio is your studio space doesn't heat up and your clients don't become uncomfortable. Look how soft that light is. We've basically got a 1 foot by 1 foot panel. We've got a little bit of diffusion on the front of it. And pointing it at the camera, you can see the shadow on the background becomes nice and soft. Putting 4 of these panels together would make you a really beautiful, larger soft light. Now, this technology was made basically for the movie industry, and these can be pretty pricey. So there are some other things on the market that are available that are less pricey, and we're seeing innovation happen so quickly now that the prices are dropping almost weekly. This is probably my favorite little LED light. It basically has 312 LEDs on the front. Now, half the LEDs are daylight balanced. The other half of the LEDs are balanced for tungsten. And what that means is, when we turn this on, I'm going to be able to show you, this is the daylight setup. The only bulbs that are on are the daylight bulbs. This is tungsten. The only bulbs on are the tungsten bulbs. And I can balance anywhere in the middle to match any other sort of lighting system out there. I can match to the fluorescents, I can match to our hot lights, and I can match to our electronic strobe. I always like to use them with a diffuser on the front. I'm going to spin this around and point it again at our camera and turn it up. Now, this one is smaller than the last LED that I showed you, so you'll see the shadow is a little bit harder on the edges. And that just goes with hard and soft light, as we've seen before. If we wanted to make this softer, we could put a diffusion scrim in there and take care of it. But having these rheostats on the back that allow us to control the output and the color gives us an incredibly flexible tool for the studio. Now, these might not be powerful enough to match daylight and some of the other larger fixtures that come out, but they also make wonderful little fill lights. So I think this is where the future of photography and video is headed. And I use these almost daily in my studio to do all kinds of work. The only downsides right now for LED lights, especially in the inexpensive categories, is slight irregularities in color. But you know how to fix that because all it takes is a custom white balance. So small, light, and portable. One more thing I want to show you about these lights. You'll notice there's no plug anywhere. We haven't plugged these into the wall. These are battery powered. Now, there is a plug on the back and you could put an AC adapter on, but it uses two inexpensive camcorder batteries. And you notice the light stays on even when I remove one of the two batteries. It's taking power from one battery first and then the other battery, which makes it very reliable for location work. We've used these in doctors' offices, studios, and businesses, and it's a wonderful way to add just a little bit of accent light and match what's already there. If we use them in the studio and we turn off all the other lighting in the studio, they're fabulous as portrait lighting instruments. So LEDs, this little one is about $150, and it gives you all that capability. The previous generation, the light panels, are maybe 10 times that cost. They're rugged, they're made for studio work, and they're very lightweight. But I think this is going to be the future for most people who are doing what I would call hybrid still photography and video. And I've got to admit, I'm pretty much sold on these things. They're great. All the LED lights that I've shown you so far are panels. And the one problem with panels is that it's hard to get a hard light with a panel. You've got so much surface area, and it basically makes it into a softer light source. But I saved the best one for last, or at least my favorite light for last. It's a new LED, and it uses a front surface design, very concentrated LEDs in the front of the light. So this makes it basically like a more traditional movie or video light, and it's absolutely fabulous for photography. I love these things, and I'm going to show you a few things about the light. But first I want to spin it around and show you that we're able to get like a hard edge from an LED light. And I think a lot of people in the film and TV industry will be interested in that as well. So I'm going to turn it around, aim it at my camera again, turn it on, turn it up, and wow, I have a nice hard edge where the other panels gave me a softer edge. So if I wanted to do something with a harder light to show more detail, to show more texture, or to throw light in a very specific place, I can certainly do that. There's one control on here that allows me to go from 10% power to 100% power, and that's wonderful. If you're using it with multiple light sources, you can fine-tune exactly where you want the power output from that light. The other control is, again, color temperature. Old generation of lights, you were fixed either at tungsten or daylight, but now you have the ability to go from full daylight all the way down to tungsten at the turn of a knob. And I think that's fabulous. Now this light's fairly expensive, but it's expensive because the color accuracy is very, very high. And even when you change the color temperatures, the color accuracy stays high. The final thing, having a light, LED light that gives you a harder edge allows you to use attachments like barn doors to further control your light. So here are barn doors on this light, and they would allow me to go in there and do that same kind of slash that we did on our other light. I like blue light for my slashes, so I'm going to go ahead and change it to a blue light. I'm going to turn my barn doors a little bit and slash them down. You can't do that really with a big panel. You can't limit the softness the same way. So we've got a beautiful slash through there. We've got hard edges on our shadow. We've got great color consistency, and we've got it in something that's basically a very small package. I can fit 4 of these in a standard camera bag, and I'm ready to shoot, which I think is wonderful. You see the adapter here. This is running off AC power, like the power in your house, but this plug allows you to also use a 12-volt battery. So you can go into the field and shoot for 4 or 5 hours at a time at full power with this light from a battery. When I said LEDs were the future of lighting for photographers and videographers, I largely meant LED lights like this that are so configurable and so adaptable, and yet at the same time highly accurate. Now, you've got this hard edge on your shadows. If you wanted to soften it, all you have to do is add diffusion. You turn your hard light into a soft light. Speaking of diffusion, we're about to go into our next lesson, which is all about modifiers. How to use diffusion, how to use umbrellas, soft boxes, and all the other ways that you can modify the light to get exactly what you need. This is Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. Welcome back. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. So in this lesson, we're going to learn about modifiers. We looked at all the available lights that we can use to light a portrait, but we know from our understanding of hard light and soft light that modifiers can make a big difference in the final look. I thought I'd start out with one of the most popular modifiers around, and that's a softbox. People use softboxes generally on studio electronic flash equipment, and softboxes have been around for about 50 years. So right over my shoulder, I have a basic 2-foot by 3-foot softbox that someone might use for portrait setup. Now, just to let you know, I'm not putting any lights on the background, and I'm not using a fill light because I'd like to let you guys see exactly what the modifier itself's doing. If I put other lights in the scene, it wouldn't be as easy to show exactly what our modifier's doing. Like any modifier, what you're looking to do is take a small light source and expand the apparent size of that light source. So in a softbox, we're taking a small flash tube that's maybe 2 inches in diameter, and when the light hits the diffusion cloth, all of a sudden we have a light that's 2 feet by 3 feet in diameter. And that gives us softer shadows, and it gives us a much nicer transition from the highlight areas to the shadows. Additionally, it gives us nicely filled in shadows. I'm using the softbox in kind of a horizontal orientation. Let me show you what the softbox looks like. Essentially, it's just a black, flexible box with a white diffusion on the front. Now, I'm not pointing it directly at our model Victoria. I'm feathering it a little bit toward the front, so it's actually looking off in front of her. Now, most of the light is coming across her face, but some of it's wrapping around to the other side. And that's a beautiful thing with any of the larger diffusers, is that you actually get a little bit of roll into the shadow areas, which makes it a lot cleaner light source. So I'm using my softbox fairly close in. As a rule of thumb, I like my softbox or any of my modifiers to be about 1 to 1.5 times their diameter. So if the diameter of the softbox is approximately 2.5 or 3 feet, 3 feet to 5 feet is a sweet spot for that modifier in terms of the apparent size, the softness, and the effect that you're trying to get for the portrait. So I've placed it about 45 degrees between camera and Victoria, and I think I might actually go up just a little bit, get it more of a 45 up, which I like. That allows me to drop the shadow from her chin down below her chin. I'm going to modify that just a little bit. There we go. So if I have the bottom of the softbox above Victoria's chin, it allows me to drop the shadow underneath. Now, Victoria doesn't need any help, but if you have a subject who's got a little bit of extra flesh under the chin, it helps to drop it into shadow. It's a nice thing to do. If you bring the light down too far, it flattens out the look, and it accentuates some of the things that you're trying to avoid. The other thing is that when I light Victoria, I'm trying to get a little triangle under her eye on the right-hand side. I guess that's her left eye. And let's go ahead and we'll take a frame right now and see how it all looks. So, I've got it lined up. That's great. Victoria, can you turn a little bit this way? Yeah, that's perfect. And there's a soft, nice transition from the nose into the shadow. And the transition on the cheek that goes to shadow is pretty smooth and soft. And we've got a few little dark areas in there, but we would normally just add a piece of foam core as a reflector, or we could add a second fill light to fill in those shadow areas. So the softbox is doing a really nice job. I would prefer a larger source for my portraits, but a lot of people prefer the smaller softbox. Now, there are a couple detractions to softboxes, one of which is attaching it to the light source requires an extra speed ring that fits around the electronic flash and holds the little arms for the softbox. It can be difficult to set up if you haven't done it before, but not that big of a deal. It does require some setup and takedown time. The nice thing about a softbox is that it keeps all that light from the flash from spilling out on the sides and the back. So if you're working in a light room with white walls and a white ceiling and your room's kind of small, it helps not to have that light spilling anywhere because you're able to put just as much contrast into your light as you want. A small room with a lot of spill to the back reduces your contrast and fills in the light even when you don't want it filled in. And that's kind of a detriment. The softbox is a great way to go. It's quick, easy, and efficient, and it puts out a beautiful light. If you want to, you can get larger softboxes. They make smaller softboxes, but always remember when you buy a softbox, the smaller you get, the less effective size you'll see in the photograph, and the harsher your shadow transitions will be. Now I want to move on to some of my favorite lighting modifiers, and those are umbrellas. Umbrellas come in all different sizes, and I want to show you what the effects are. But before I move on from the softbox, I want to address this little piece right here. This is called a net, and I've put it in here because it helps to block light from where I don't want it to fall. I'm not really interested in a lot of light hitting Victoria's arms and the rest of Victoria's torso. I want to concentrate most of my light on her face. So this net allows me to cut some of the light that's hitting her shoulder, and I'll be using that net in most of these demonstrations just because I think it's a nicer feel. It concentrates our attention on the things that are important in a portrait. Softboxes are really great, but softboxes have their limitations. One thing is that softboxes are much more expensive than photographic umbrellas. The other thing is that umbrellas are very, very quick and easy to set up. Worst case scenario, you might need a little adapter for your stand that you can put your flash on, but they're easy as pie. For this demonstration of umbrellas, I'm using a little hot light back there. It kicks out a lot of power. It's going to warm up the studio, but it'll allow everybody to see exactly what's happening as we change to different sizes of umbrellas. So what we're starting with is a 32-inch umbrella, and it casts a pretty nice light on Victoria. I'm going to take a photograph and just take a quick look at it and see what we've got. That's great right there. Okay, what I'm seeing on here is a little bit more nose shadow than we had on the softbox. That's because the umbrella is a little bit smaller and maybe I've got it a little bit further away. But overall the light's really nice and it matches for the most part what we were doing with that softbox. Now you'll notice on that umbrella we've got a black backing on here, so we're not getting a lot of spill into the room. So it actually mimics one of the attributes of the softbox pretty nicely. Small umbrellas are great when you want to put something up quickly and get a nice bright contrasty light going in a room. You can see that it spreads pretty well through the background. It spreads more than our softbox does. That means the angle of the light coming out is greater. And it helps us light up both the background and Victoria at the same time, which can be a bonus if you're limited on the number of lights that you have. Now that's what one of the smaller umbrellas looks like. Let's go to the opposite extreme and see what our biggest umbrella looks like. I'm going to grab one. Wow, that is my favorite umbrella. That thing is enormous. It's about 80 inches across. And it's perfect for me because I'm always looking for the biggest, softest directional source I can find to do portraits with. I think it's incredibly flattering on people's skin. And you know what? A huge umbrella like that is about $100. A softbox that size would be $400 or $500. So it's a fabulous bargain in my eyes. So what we're seeing here on Victoria is big, soft, beautiful light with wonderful transitions between highlight and shadow. I've got the umbrella a little low now. I'm going to position it up a little bit higher and bring it around just a little to the front so that I can light Victoria perfectly with this. Hang with me. Ooh, yeah, that's great. A little bit higher. And then a little bit right there. As you can see, it's really forgiving of placement. I could move it 6 or 8 inches in one direction or another, and because of the spread of the light and the amount of angle spread to the light, it's really not going to make a huge difference overall. So very flattering and very easy to work with. And again, you can use this with electronic flash, even the smallest electronic flashes, if you've got the right stand adapter. I'm using the tungsten light so we can all see what it looks like. Let me go ahead and take a few shots of Victoria, and we'll talk about what we see. Okay. Wow, it is so soft. It actually may be a little too soft for Victoria because her skin is so nice and smooth anyway. But we've got beautiful transitions from highlight to shadow. The shadows are very open because the light is wrapping around and introducing itself into the shadow areas where a smaller diffuser would not be able to do that. If we were going to do our final setup with this, instead of just showing you what the big umbrella looks like, I'd probably drop some black material onto the other side to increase that shadow contrast a little bit without messing up my original contrast on her face. But this is the kind of lighting that I really love, and it also works well for small groups, for 2 people, 3 people, things like that when you're doing portraits, because it's smooth over a longer distance than light from a softbox. And that makes a huge difference when you're doing a small family portrait. Anyway, I've got one more thing to show you as far as umbrellas go. It's called a shoot-through umbrella. It's a little different than the 2 umbrellas we've looked at. This one also has the black on the back, so it's basically just a big reflector. But the shoot-through umbrella is a different animal. So let's grab that and see what it looks like. The first 2 umbrellas I showed you had black backings to them, and they kept the light from spilling out and hitting the wall behind the light source. And that helped to keep all the contrast in basically the gamut we wanted it to be in. But I'd like to show you another source, which is basically a shoot-through umbrella. Instead of bouncing off of it and having the light hit the model, you're actually pushing the light through just like you would with a diffuser. And the nice thing about it versus a diffuser is it's quick and easy to set up. So right behind me I have a medium-sized umbrella, about 38 inches across, and my light source is coming through the front panel of the umbrella to light Victoria. It's equally soft, not as soft as the 80-inch, but as soft as a 38-inch umbrella used in the opposite orientation. And you see it's got the nice fall off, the nice even shadow transitions that we've come to experience from umbrella lights. And we're using it in a little bit closer because the shaft doesn't stick out. We can put the light as close as we want to the model. There's no obstructions. It's really a nice light source. And if you want extra fill, if you want a very high key or a very light look to your photographs, you'll appreciate the fact that kind of the rounded front sends light out in all different directions and gives you some natural fill in a room. Now, what I talked about earlier in terms of dropping some black in if you have too much natural fill, what I was referring to is basically a light blocker, like this piece of fabric here on a frame. This is just some matte black fabric. And I put it here because I felt like Victoria's shadow areas were filled in too much from a reflection from a white wall. This allows me to control how much contrast I want in the photograph. Now, it doesn't have to be a fancy frame with fabric. You can get a piece of foam core and spray paint it matte black if you want to, and that'll work just as well. We call it negative fill, because you're actually subtracting some of the light that would normally be bouncing off an adjacent white wall. And the effect is just increasing the depth of the shadows and giving you a little bit more contrast overall. I'm going to take a couple of shots so that we can look at them and talk about them. But this is a quick, easy, and inexpensive way to modify lights for portrait work. Adding the black to the other side just gives you another level of control. So, that's perfect right there. I'd love to see a big, beautiful smile. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is a really nice soft light, and I expected that because it's a fairly big umbrella. 38 inches is about the size of the softbox we started with, but it spreads more, so it's actually even softer, and I'm able to use it just a little bit closer. Now, what I'm also seeing on here, which is different from what I saw with the big umbrella, is that black blocker, or that black piece of fabric, is giving me deeper, richer shadows on this side. They're not as filled in, and I like that. So to sum up, the shoot-through umbrella is a good, economical way to light something. It'll give you a much higher key or lighter feel than a softbox, which keeps the rest of the light from bouncing. And the black fill card, or the black negative fill card, gives us more control. All in all, it's a great way to light a portrait. So we've looked at a softbox and we've looked at umbrellas, but I'd like to show you what they use on movie sets and what might give you the most control over your lighting. If nothing else, it'll give you an equal amount of control. And what I'm talking about are what we call diffusion scrims. These are just frames with white material on the front of them, and they allow us to stick the diffusion material in between the light and the subject and modify it. The ones I like to use are about 4 feet by 4 feet in diameter, and they come on aluminum frames as basically just a white ripstop nylon cloth that you can get in various widths or various thicknesses so that you can have it a little bit softer, a little bit harder. So my frame is going to sit right here between my light source and Victoria, and let's see what happens when we turn it on. Now, the scrim is really great because you can change the distance between your lighting instrument, the actual light source, and the diffusion scrim. And by doing that, you can drop down the levels without moving your diffuser anywhere, or you can make it a little bit harder and a little bit softer if you're using a thinner material on the front, because some light naturally goes through unobstructed or undiffused. It's more direct, and the rest of the light gets diffused. It's a really nice effect. Now, I can leave that light source exactly where it is and move my scrim in closer without changing the exposure. I'll get a softer light source because we know that the closer the diffusion scrim is to our subject, the bigger the apparent light source is and the softer it becomes. The neat thing about scrims that you don't get with a softbox or an umbrella is the ability to kind of wiggle it or twist it to modify its position vis-a-vis both the background and the model. So we've got a little light coming in on our background back there, and it might bother some people. We can just twist our diffuser without changing the location of our light source, and we can remediate most of the spill on the background. Easy as pie. If we're using a softbox, we'd have to move the whole instrument, which would change our lighting just a little bit. This gives us a lot more options. And I think you'll agree, nice and soft, a lot like our shoot-through umbrella, but since it's flat instead of curved, it doesn't kick light into all corners of the room the same way a shoot-through umbrella would do. So let's take a picture of Victoria and see what the difference is. It's a big soft source, but I'm getting a nice little bit of black under her chin, which gives her face more definition. And I'm getting good modeling across her face. Since it is a fairly big source, it does wrap around the same way all our other large sources have. So this is the diffuser that I use for 99% of the portraits that I do, but I have a secret diffuser that I love even more, and I pull it out on special occasions. I'm going to get that one right now. Every photographer is trying to find their signature look. For me, it's a really big, soft diffuser. When I go to take photographs from a portfolio or from just my own satisfaction as an artist, I always look for my biggest diffuser in my arsenal, and that's my 6 foot by 6 foot white diffusion scrim. I've got it set up between 2 light stands here, and I've got it set up so that it's slightly forward from Victoria so that the light can still wrap around in front of her. Now, you've got a 6 foot by 6 foot scrim, 36 square feet of light coming on your subject. It's very light, it's very diffuse, and it's still directional. You might want to drop some black to the other side to bring your shadows back up if you're in a small white room. But in my book, it's basically the ultimate light source for portrait light. Now, there are some problems with it. It's huge, it takes 2 light stands, it's hard to maneuver, and you're not going to be dragging it around from room to room on an assignment. But if you're working in the studio, it's a fabulous piece of diffusion material. It's a fabulous modifier to have. Let me go ahead and take a couple of photographs and let's talk about them. Hi, Victoria. That's great. I want to see the smile. Yeah, right there. Oh, so on this one, because of the size of the modifier, basically the skin tone is smooth as can be. It's filling in any sort of pores and any sort of irregularities on the skin. The transition to the shadows is flawless. It's nice, soft, very gradual, and it's very flattering. It's the perfect kind of light for most stuff, and I really love it. We've even got great detail on the hair all the way over to the shadow side. This light is wrapping around from right here, so we've got an angle into the hairline that's just perfect. And if you look at the catch lights in her eyes, they're big and beautiful, and they glow. I love it. So I showed you my giant diffuser, which is one of my favorite light modifiers ever. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that you have to run out and buy lots of different things in order to do really nice studio portrait photography. In fact, you can use some of the simplest things that fall to hand, like a piece of white foam core as your lighting modifier. All you're trying to do is take a small light source and make it apparently bigger. So in this demo, what I've got is a piece of white foam core that I bought from Michaels. It's cheap, I cut it to size, it fits on one of my light stands, and it works great. What we're doing is bouncing that light into it, and we're taking the reflection off the foam core, just like we took the reflection off the two umbrellas that are white on the inside and black on the outside, and we're bouncing it back onto her face. Now, if you extrapolate that just a little bit, you'll understand that instead of a piece of foam core, if you have a big white wall, you can aim your light at that big white wall, and the entire wall becomes your modifier, because it spreads the light source out and then bounces back towards your subject. By extension, you could bounce your light off the ceiling, and you get a big, beautiful, diffused light source from the reflection on the ceiling, which is remarkable. Here in the studio, we're just using a piece of foam core, but always remember, if you've got a white wall or a white ceiling, you've got a bounce modifier right there, and it doesn't cost a cent. So let me go ahead and take a few shots of Victoria with this setup, and we'll talk about the difference. Here we go. Hi, Victoria. So, okay, this is actually beautiful lighting. It's nice and soft. It's a little bit softer than our softbox because it's actually a little bit bigger. It's wrapping light nicely because of the size. We could turn it horizontally and get more wrap from side to side. It's a really nice source for no money at all, and I like that. So reflectors, diffusers, and all the other tools are just modifiers that we use to make that light source bigger, and you can use whatever falls to hand. Now, in the next section, we're going to be talking about some of the other tools that you'll need to outfit your studio and to get up and running shooting portraits. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. Welcome back. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. In today's lesson, I would like to talk about the studio itself. The studio is where everything happens for most portrait photographers, and this lesson will be about the way you can lay out your studio, what you need in terms of space, and what you need in terms of tools, things like light stands, backgrounds, etc. What I'd like to start out with is basically a discussion of how much space you're going to need for your studio. I'm going to throw out some optimum dimensions, but of course if you have a smaller room or a room that doesn't match these, there are ways to make it work. So the very first thing I'm going to do is start sketching on this Cintiq pad, and that'll give me a nice graphic way to represent this. What I'm drawing in right now is my representation of a background. So background papers, which are what we usually use, come in 9-foot rolls, and we stick them at one end of the studio. I like to have about 8 to 10 feet of space between my background and my portrait sitter. And I'm going to put a little mark here that says 8 to 10 feet, so you'll remember. Now, the reason I do this is because a 9-foot background gives you a lot of flexibility when you're lighting. And I want to be able to light my background separate from my foreground and separate from my subject. So I can put a little light fixture right behind my portrait subject, very close in, maybe a foot behind him, and still have 8 or 9 feet worth of distance to work with. That'll allow the light to spread. Or I can put the light into a tight spot and use a smaller amount of the background behind. And that'll give me an effect where I have a light spot in the middle and it radiates darker as it goes out. It's a nice effect. So that's our first basic parameter, is you need to have about 8 to 10 feet between your subject and your background. And a background doesn't have to be paper. You can use canvas, you can use materials you've found, or materials you've made. So the next thing when I'm putting together a studio is I'd like to have between 10 and 12 feet between myself. I'm the photographer here, and that's my representation of my tripod and my camera. But I like to have anywhere between 10 and 12 feet between myself and the subject, my portrait subject. And the reason for that is I might like to use longer lenses. If you're really into portraiture, you're probably going to be working with focal lengths that are between 70 millimeters and 200 millimeters. And using the longer end of that zoom range is a fabulous thing, but you don't want to be too close because you don't want the head to dominate the frame necessarily. Being able to get back 8 feet or even 12 feet allows you to use some of those longer focal lengths to kind of compress your scene a little bit. And it's an effect that you can't get with a point-and-shoot camera, and you can't get with an iPhone or one of the camera phones. So it really helps to differentiate your work from the big universe of amateur work that's out in the market. So when you start adding these up, you've got 10 feet here, you've got 10 to 12 feet here, that's about 22 feet, and you want a little space behind you so that you can stumble back and grab more tools and more things to play with. The neat thing about the different lenses, like zoom lenses and different focal lengths, is if you use a wider lens and you want to fill the frame with a typical portrait composition, and you're using a wider lens like a 50 millimeter or 75 millimeter, you probably have to be pretty close as the camera operator to fill the frame in a way that looks nice compositionally. But that lens will give you a pretty wide angle of view, and you'll see a whole lot of stuff going on in the background. That's kind of counterproductive to portrait photography, because essentially what you want to do is have the interest on your subject. You want them to be front and center. So as you move further back, that longer lens gives you a much narrower angle of view and allows you to kind of compress that frame in, which is a much more satisfying approach because it puts all the attention onto your subject. Having a little extra room behind you means you can back up and do some effects that most people won't be able to do without this kind of studio. So the optimum dimension, the long dimension for your studio, is going to be between 22 and maybe 30 feet. That'll give you enough working room to do just about anything you want to do, including shots of 2 people, shots of little family groups, etc., and still not run off the edges of your background paper by having to shoot too close with a wider lens. So the next thing is the side-to-side dimensionality of the studio. You're going to want to put your lights somewhere, and you don't always want to put your lights very close to the same angle of view as the camera. When you're doing something with short light, you might have an umbrella over to the side here at 45 degrees, and you might want to put it, for effect, a little further away. I generally have my umbrellas at about 1 to 1.5 the diameter of the actual modifier away from my subject. So that would mean with a large umbrella, like an 80-inch umbrella, I might have my umbrella back 7 or 8 feet from the subject. If we look at the center line of the studio, right down the middle, from my subject to the light, 8 feet, if we do our math, we need about 6 feet of side-to-side space to make that work. And we probably want to have that on either side so we can light from whichever direction we want. And that gives us a basic minimum of about 12 feet, but if you're looking at groups and whatnot, you want to have at least 6 more feet beyond that in order to put your group on the background and actually cover. So a basic studio space that's really functional is going to be about 20 feet by 30 feet minimum. So now I'd like to talk about ceiling height. We've talked about the XY dimensions. We need to talk about how high a ceiling you really need to do nice portrait work. Here's my background. Here's my portrait sitter. Here's me with my camera. Really nice camera. Now, I can't really light from the same level that I'm standing at, so I need to have that light up. If I'm going to photograph a subject who's, say, 6 feet tall, and I want the bottom edge of my light modifier to be above his chin level in order to have the shadows fall underneath and give me a little black under his chin, I'm going to have my lighting fixture and my modifier up so that the bottom of the modifier is at 6 feet. That means on a larger umbrella that the top of the modifier might be 10 or 12 feet high. The optimum studio space is going to have ceilings that are anywhere from 14 to 20 feet high. You want that so that you can put your lighting units up above your subject instead of on the same plane. If you put a lighting unit and a modifier in the same plane with your subject, you fill in with a front light that's very unflattering. Light that comes from high angles and side angles is always going to be more flattering. And it's the same for a hair light on the back of the set. If I have a hair light down low, it rims the entire subject, but it doesn't necessarily cover the top part of the hair where I want the accent to show up as I'm photographing from the other side. So I might stick a hair light up at 10 or 12 feet. It'll be 4 to 6 feet above my subject, and it allows the light to come down and kind of wrap over the top instead of just hitting on the back. So it's important to have the ceiling height. Now there are ways around it. If you can't find a space that has a high ceiling like that, if you're working in a house with, say, 9-foot ceilings, you'll probably do some adaptation like having most of your portrait subjects sitting rather than standing. That'll give you a little more ceiling height. Or you can do things like use smaller modifiers that you can get up a little higher and still get under the lip. Your trade-off is, of course, that the smaller the modifier, the harder the edge of the light is going to be. So we've looked at the basic requirements for studio. One of the things that I want to talk about is being able to control light in the studio. My first question when people ask me about studios, it's generally, what color should I paint it? Now, if you paint your studio bright pink, everything you shoot in that studio is going to have a bright pink cast to it. And you're either going to spend time in post-production trying to get a pink cast out, or you're going to live with bad color correction. If you're painting your studio, you want your walls to be white. If you get reflection or kick off the walls, you want it to be very, very neutral. Same thing with the floor. I've actually been in studio spaces where people didn't think this all the way through. They had white walls, but they had beautiful red carpeting or beautiful blue carpeting on the floors. And of course, any light that comes past the subject and hits the floor kicks back up in whatever color that is. So most studios that work well have just a neutral concrete floor, or in some situations that studios I've owned, I've painted the floor a very neutral gray. Now, ceilings are up for discussion. I like to paint my ceilings black, and that's because we use a lot of lighting methodologies where there's spill light coming out of the back of a modifier out of a fixture. If that light hits the ceiling and comes back down, it kind of serves as a fill light, and it may be an unwanted fill light. It may put more light back on my subject than I originally wanted to do in my design. So having a black ceiling gives me the opportunity to kill that light that's bouncing up and allows me to really set up the contrast level that I want in the studio space. So white walls, black ceiling, neutral floor. The next thing about studios, if you're building from scratch, you probably want to make your camera room without windows. Windows are wonderful, and it's great to look out on your front yard and see Bambi eating your grass. But the reality is that every time you go to shoot something where you need a lot of control, and especially in situations where you're using continuous lighting, you'll have to sit there and cover all of your windows first to keep the mismatched light, and by mismatched I may mean different color temperatures or different strengths, but you want to keep the mismatched light out of your studio and have just one light source. If you're in a situation where you have windows and that's the room you get to use, you'll want to make sure that you cut some sort of board, foam core, whatever, put black on one side and fit them into your windows so that you can control what's coming in as you're shooting. Now, we've referenced background, 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 and what I'd like to do now is show you what I mean by my background system and show you the kinds of materials that we use routinely in the studio as background. So, we've been talking about backgrounds, and I wanted to show you what a background system looks like and what it's all about. This is a typical background system for a studio. It's basically just two strong light stands, one on either side, and a pole that's about 9.5 feet long. It just holds rolls of seamless paper, and the seamless paper is what we use for a lot of different photographs, a lot of different portrait setups, because it's easy to roll some down. If it gets dirty, we can cut off the dirty part and throw it away. If we need to change colors, we'll roll one up and roll the other one down. I use a basic selection of black, white, and gray. Gray's my favorite, but there are a lot of times when you're doing a low-key shot that you'd like to have a black background in. Other times you're trying to do a high-key shot, or you're trying to drop the background out, and a white background is a perfect choice. But for me, gray is a beautiful studio choice. I can use it, and with the flexibility of lighting, including the background lights that I use, I can get a lot of different effects. I'd like to show you one of the effects on the background, but first I'm going to talk about maybe the two most important things in the studio, the things that hold us all together. One of them is a typical A-clamp. You can buy these at any hardware store for a couple bucks. You'll notice we've got two of them up there holding the seamless background papers in place, and then two more over on this other side. We use these to clamp foam core to light stands. In fact, we can use these to clamp just about anything to a light stand if it doesn't already have a connector. So, A-clamps, really great. The other thing that holds our studio together is gaffer's tape. We love gaffer's tape. This is the more expensive, more highly capable version of duct tape. It doesn't stick to stuff when you pull it off. There's no sticky residue. With A-clamps and duct tape, there's very little you can't do in a studio. Sometimes I even use the gaffer's tape to pull fabric together and tighten up somebody's shirt and make them look a little bit better dressed. Now, what I'd like to show you right now is just how we can throw some light onto our background and get different effects. I'm going to come over here, grab a light, and switch it on. And you see we've got a nice even glow on the background. So when I'm using a gray background, I can pull this glow in. I can let the edges drop off to a little bit darker tone, and I can accentuate our portrait subject by doing that. Now, gray is a wonderful color to work with because it's so neutral. And if I want to make this background a different color, instead of running out and buying another roll of seamless, I can always just filter my background light to make that glow a totally different color. So let me show you that. I've found a blue filter, and I want to stick it in front of the light. And voila, I have a blue background. So, very flexible with our gray. A wonderful thing. Now, no studio is complete without the lights, but without something to support the lights, you're kind of dead in the water. So we've got light stands. And light stands run the gamut. There are all kinds of prices and there are all kinds of styles of light stands available. What you're going to be looking for is a combination of affordability but also stability. Let me show you a really bad light stand. This spindly little guy wobbles and doesn't hold much weight. The other problem with it is that the legs or the feet on the bottom don't spread very far. So if you put much weight on the top and it gets top heavy, it's very easy to knock over. For not much more money, you can get a much better light stand like this one from Monfrado. It's got a lot of sections to it. It's got twist locks to lock your different extensions in place. You can see that the base of it is much wider than our first light stand, and it's pretty stable. This is a good compromise between price, structural stability, and weight. And I mention weight because we go on location a lot, and even though we'd like our light stands to be absolutely rock solid, carrying a very stout light stand around is a lesson in physical fitness. So let me show you one of the really fabulous light stands, and we'll talk about that. It's right over here. This is an Avenger light stand, and this is what you'll see on a lot of movie sets where they're not hanging their lights from the ceiling. This is an all-metal, beautifully constructed light stand. Most of the components are steel. It's heavy, probably weighs 3 to 4 times what our previous light stand did. But it's capable of going up very high, holding very heavy lights or very heavy modifiers, and it'll last you a lifetime. So these kind of stands are kind of the Rolls-Royce of studio light stands, and they would be my choice if I didn't leave the studio to go on location. And there's no saying you can't have 2 different sets of light stands, one for studio work and one for location. I'd like to show you one other light stand that's a favorite of mine. And it's the light stand that I had the little background light on. I'm going to take that background light off because I want to show you a couple things about this light stand. It's not the most expensive light stand on the market, but it folds up into a really small configuration. The legs come up like that. The column comes down, and you have a light stand that's this big, less than 2 feet long. You can fit 5 or 6 of these in a small case. You get on location, and you've got a fabulous range of little light stands. You'll notice that the legs are pretty wide, and there are a lot of sections, so you can get up pretty high with this light stand. If you're doing a lighting setup with a lot of small portable battery-powered flashes, this may be just the ticket because it's rigid enough to hold those particular flashes about that high. And that's a good length for a seated portrait. Well, these are the basic tools that we use in the studio. There's one more thing I want to show you, and that's my tripod. After my cameras and my lights, my favorite studio tool's got to be my tripod. I love tripods. You'll find some photographers out there who are like, oh, I shoot everything handheld. Sorry, not me. Tripods are great because they stabilize your composition. If you've set up a portrait and portrait lighting, your tripod is showing you the exact edges, or your camera is showing you the exact edges you want. The tripod anchors you there. If you're handheld, you're moving all over the place. You might get a good expression, but your light glow in the background might be off, your composition might be off, you might not have enough headroom above your model, things like that. The tripod serves to lock everything down where you want it. The other benefit of using a tripod, now that we're moving away from flash and doing more and more things with continuous light, is a tripod can anchor your camera and not get you any sort of movement and vibration. And that's a wonderful thing. There are lots of different tripods on the market. But what you should look for is a tripod that's very sturdy, that doesn't move around when you push on it. You don't want a tripod with too many leg extensions because each joint point for the leg extensions is a weak spot. When you have too many extensions, your tripod gets wobbly. You may be able to fold it down pretty small, but you'll lose the effective, stable base of that tripod as you add extensions to it. Now, I think a perfect tripod should be able to go up tall enough so that I can shoot eye to eye with somebody who's 6'6". Now, I'm only 5'8", but my tripod can actually go up with the center column to a position where I can shoot somebody who is about 6'6" from camera level. Obviously, if I can't put my eye up to the viewfinder, I'm kind of sunk. So I use in my studio what's called an apple box. It's just a wooden box. It's very sturdy, and it's built for mostly film and video crews to put things on and stick things under, and for short directors and photographers to stand on. Now I'm able to go at eye level to my tripod and shoot somebody who's much taller than me. The tripod's still giving me a very flexible base for that. And my Apple box gives me a lot of stability as well because it's right flat on the ground. Now let me show you a few more things about tripods. One is that you're going to have a tripod head. This is where you attach your camera, and you want a head that's solid enough so that there's no wiggle room once you've got that camera up there. Really inexpensive tripod heads tend to not be able to hold much weight. This is a magnesium head from Manfrotto, and it's a good combination of low cost but good stability and good flexibility. This is what we call a ball head. And by releasing its lock right here, I can move it all around. I can tilt it forward, tilt it backward. If I turn it sideways, this is the rotation lock. If I turn it sideways, I can do vertical to horizontal, horizontal to vertical, which is really great. Pull it back into position, lock it in place, and it's rock solid. Lock your rotation device, and you're ready to go. Now, I like to use a ball head instead of the traditional two-axis tilt head because I can sit there and look through the camera with a grid on my screen or a level and get exactly the composition I want with one hand and one control, and then lock in when I've got what I need. And that's a really good time saver in the studio. The other control on this particular tripod is for elevation of the center column. Now, I don't like to elevate the center column very often, certainly not to its maximum extension, because you start to get into some stability problems. It's just basic physics. So I try to keep it right around my eye level most of the time and locked in there. Now, there are a lot of taller tripods and a lot of shorter tripods on the market. Most of them are made out of metal. You've probably noticed that this one is made out of wood. I live in Texas, and sometimes in the summer it gets up to 110 or 112 degrees. I've actually grabbed a black metal tripod on a summer shoot in the outdoors and come away with burned hands. And that's no fun. This tripod's built out of ash wood, and it doesn't absorb heat at all. I can grab it in full sun and walk off over the mountains with it and not burn my hands. I like the feel of wood. It's very organic. It's also very good at resisting vibration. So a wood tripod might not be for you, but I think wood tripods are really kind of a neat tool. There's one more trick that this tripod and a lot of other tripods do. The normal leg spread is about to here. By clicking a switch right here, I can extend that tripod leg out all the way like this. And you may wonder why I would do that, but if I need to anchor it against a rock or a wall, I'm able to do that, and I'm able to get the tripod down really low with those controls. So it's a very flexible tool. It's one that I don't want to leave the studio without. And when you're shopping for tripods, the things to remember are you need a solid base. You should be able to really lean on that tripod without having it wiggle or move around. The tripod should be light enough for you to carry, because if you buy too heavy of a tripod in your quest for stability, you'll leave it at home because it's too much of a hassle to bring along. The other thing is that you want to make sure it goes as high as you'll need it to go for your typical shooting experiences. And there are a lot of tall people in the world, so I think 6 feet to 6 foot 6 inches is reasonable. Get the best head that you can find, make sure that it works with your camera, and make sure that it will handle the weight that you want to put on it. If you're in a store and you're looking at a tripod and you're using a small camera, everything might seem just wonderful. You put a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, a fast one, on there, and you've probably added 5 more pounds out in front of your camera, and that'll pull an inexpensive tripod head down. So basically, tripod is my favorite studio tool after my cameras and my lights. It'll probably become yours as well. I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite lighting tools. Now, this is basically, there are a lot of names for it. Some people call it a flex fill, some people call it a pop-up reflector. This is a wonderful and inexpensive tool for photographers because you can do so many things with it. It's like the Swiss Army knife of lighting equipment. One side's black to do negative fill, the other side's silver. which will do a lot of really nice positive fill like this. Ta-da! But the black will give me some negative fill like this, which I think is fabulous. It's just basically a big spring with fabric on it. And I can use it in the summer over my head to block sunlight because the silver will pop that sunlight up. I can use the black side to cut reflections out of windows and things like that, or as I said, the negative fill. But there's so much more to this little pop-up reflector. And one of those things is that there's an inside. Let me unzip it. We'll explore this thing. Oh, wouldn't you know it, you do a demo and the zipper gets caught. There we go. Inside this outer wrapper is my core lighting device, which is a translucent diffusion surface, just like the diffusion panels that we've been using in some of our lighting demonstrations. And I can put a light through here and make this a light modifier, or I can use this white surface as a reflector. Either way, it's pretty versatile. These are not expensive at all. You should be able to buy a flexible fill reflector like this with all the different surfaces for right around $50 in most camera stores or online. Whenever we leave our house to go out on assignment, we've got 2 or 3 of these in the car because you never know where you're going to use one. Sometimes I'll use this as a diffuser with a light source going through it and then take the rest of the fabric and tack it up on a wall for negative fill, which is really a wonderful thing to get 2 uses out of one $50 device. And they seem to last forever. I look around the studio and I forget sometimes that I've got extra ones, so I'll buy one at the camera store, I'll come home and I'll look and there will be a stack of 10 more. But I can never throw them out because there's always some special use for them. I don't see how a photographer can do without these. Now, the most exciting thing is trying to put them back into the small configuration to fit back in their bag. You have to grab them like this, twist them, and ta-da! They're 1/4 the size they were when we were using them. The most impressive thing, though, is the sound they make when you pop them open. Beautiful. That's it. That's my flex fill reflector. In our next lesson, we're going to learn some lighting principles, and we'll learn how to use some of the tools and some of the lighting equipment that we've been talking about so that we can do things like short lighting, broad lighting, low-key lighting, high lighting. It's going to be fabulous. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. Welcome back. I'm Kirk Tuck, and this is Studio Portrait Lighting. In this lesson, I'm going to show you some of the ways we use our lights, where we place them and how we feather them to make people look really good. The first things we're going to cover are broad lighting and short lighting. This is a way of setting our lights in juxtaposition to our subject's face to make the image most flattering. So in this setup, we're just using a main light and a little light on our background for separation. Now, the main light is one of my 4x4 foot scrims, and I'm using it over to this side. I've got Victoria turned just slightly, and what we're seeing here is a really lovely shadow on this side of her face. And what this does, this is called short lighting, what this does is make people's faces look more narrow. It also accentuates the cheekbones to that side of her face. It's a very flattering way to light people, and it's something that we do a lot in our studio. So I'm going to take a quick shot, and we'll look at the shot on the back of the camera and just discuss it for a second. So if you look over here, Victoria, can you knock that one little piece? Yeah, that's beautiful. Right there is good. And, oh wow. So that's really great. What I'm seeing on here, and ignore the fact that we don't have a fill card over to this side, but what I'm seeing on here is a really nice soft light coming from this side. I'm seeing a little bit of sculpting on the cheekbones, which accentuates the kind of outlines of her face. And I'm seeing a darker shadow over here, which also shadows under her chin and gives a really good feeling to where the boundaries of her face are as they move into shadow. So it's a very flattering light style because you're really only lighting 2/3 of her face. Whatever drops into shadow goes into our brains as not that much face. That's a fabulous thing. The next thing I want to show you is broad lighting. Now there are some people who have very thin, very narrow faces, and broad lighting is a way of making their faces look a little more, for want of a better word, normal. We essentially move the light just a little bit to the side, and it changes the effect entirely. So I'm going to go ahead and do the move right now. We're going to move our light and our reflector right here. Okay, and Victoria, if you'll turn just a little bit that way. Beautiful. Now her entire face is lit. This is broad lighting. The lighting is much closer to the camera. It doesn't give us as much sculpting on cheekbones and things of that nature, but it lights the whole face more evenly. We could put a fill card in there to add more detail to her dark hair. And of course, we could add a hair light to give her some more separation from the background. But in a nutshell, this is short lighting and broad lighting. You'll probably spend most of your time making portraits using the short lighting. And the important thing is that the light's coming at a more of an angle to our subject, and the camera's at a more extreme angle this way instead of just 45 degrees. It also helps to have our subject turn in toward the light a little bit and then look back. That way we can see where the shadow's going to fall, and it's the most flattering pose. Let me take a quick shot, and we'll see what this looks like. Great. That's good right there. We still have some sculpting on her cheekbones. If we wanted to make this even more obvious, we could bring the light to the other side of the camera or bring it even closer to the front of the camera, and we would have totally flat lighting, which would make it probably the most extreme example of broad lighting. But this is the way we would light somebody who has a narrow face, or if they had lots and lots of detail in their face that we wanted to minimize. So short lighting, very dramatic. Thinning, beautiful. Broad lighting, a little more flattering for people with a thin face and for people who have a lot of texture in their skin. And that's where we are on short light and broad light. So one more quick shot. That's perfect right there. One thing I should add, and when we're talking about designing light, we always tend to put the bottom edge of our diffuser or our light modifier above the level of our subject's chin. The reason for that is we want to drop a shadow down below, and we don't want to accentuate all the area under the chin. Now Victoria she's got a nice jawline, and she doesn't have a lot of skin hanging down, but a lot of your subjects are going to be a little bit fuller. Their faces are going to be a little fuller, and they're going to have some residual skin down there. The less light you put on it, the more flattering it's going to be for that subject. Now I'd like to talk about two styles of lighting that we call low key and high key. And they're pretty much the two bracketed ends of lighting style for portraiture. Low key is exemplified by a darker and more dramatic lighting style, so that the person's face is coming out of shadow. And where we usually put our design together is with a black background, because the black background kind of anchors the whole photograph. We've got our key light right here. It's just one light through a diffuser and onto Victoria's face. I'm using short lighting on Victoria because she has such fabulous cheekbones. And you can see we've got a little slash of light across the background. We're using a background light down near the floor. It's got some barn doors that are making that little slash for us. And the final light is a hair light. Now, this is the kind of light you would use, low-key light, if you're looking for more drama in a photograph. And I would hesitate to use it in a photograph where you want a person to have a big smile on their face or a very upbeat and very happy kind of countenance. But in this situation, it lends a certain air of drama, a certain air of almost regalness to a portrait, and it pulls people in. It pulls them in because psychologically, it's a face that's light coming out of a field of dark. And the hair light and the slash light are the only things in there that keep someone like Victoria with dark hair from kind of blending into the background as a whole. Now you have to work with your talent when you set up a shot like this, you both have to have basically the same intention. If your talent shows up in a bright blouse with flowers and a lot of white to it, it's kind of antithetical to the whole kind of mood and feel that you're trying to create with low-key lighting. And it's not going to work. So in this situation, I've got everything exactly the way I want it, and Victoria came today with a black crew neck shirt that's just perfect for this. So I'm going to take a few shots of her in this setup, and then let's talk about it for a sec. Okay, right there is great. What I'm seeing is a little slash of light on the background that does a beautiful job of separating her shoulders and her shirt from the black of the background. It adds a sense of dimension and depth to the photograph, which I think is really important. The other thing that I see here is a beautiful hair light. It's not just on the top of her head, but also over here on the side. That would be the left side of the frame. And what that's doing is also separating her dark hair from the background. It's a pretty dramatic rendition. But since we're using a fairly big diffuser, the 4-foot by 4-foot diffuser from this side, and we're using it fairly close, about 1.5 times the diameter of the diffuser to Victoria, we've got a soft wraparound. Our transitions from highlight to shadow are absolutely beautiful. And we've got a portrait here that I think would make anyone happy. Now, let me make one more point. If you look at her cheek on the left side of the frame, which would be her right cheek, you can see a beautiful triangle of light. And that's what we're always looking for. That's our magic triangle. Some people call it a Rembrandt patch. It tells you basically in a nutshell that you've got your light in one of the most flattering positions in conjunction to her face that you can put the light into. And I think that's just the perfect portrait of Victoria. Now the opposite of low-key lighting, or the darker lighting we just played with, is high-key lighting. And this photograph, or this setup behind me, exemplifies high-key lighting. Instead of having a very directional source and a model coming out of dark, we've made a set that's really bright, and it's lit from both directions. We've got nominally our main light up here through this diffusion scrim. We have our large 6 by 6 foot scrim on the other side, on the left-hand side of the frame. It's got light coming through it. We're washing our white background with another light, and then we've got a light as a hair light coming across. So she's lit from just about every angle, and it gives us a very light and airy feeling in the frame. So high key is really a philosophical thing. It would be antithetical to this whole setup to have a very somber expression or a very serious expression. And you have to work with your model again on wardrobe, because it would be kind of out of place to have her in dark tones that conflict with all the white in the background. It would be a kind of a jarring contrast. So in this situation, we've got Victoria in a nice light colored blouse. Victoria's makeup is light and airy instead of darker and more dramatic. And basically, we've got a photograph, or a photograph in the making, that's going to be all about light. So I'm going to take a few shots and we'll talk about them. So Victoria, yeah, this one calls for a beautiful smile just like that. Beautiful. And I'm even exposing a little bit hotter or a little bit overexposed than I normally would in order to really kind of bring that all together and have a really light and airy frame. I'm not looking for any spots in there that are really overexposed or very dark, and I want to see into all the shadows, because that's the nature of high-key lighting. This kind of lighting is really wonderful to use on small children, young people, beautiful women, families, any place where you want a light and airy feel to the lighting. Now between a high-key setup and a low-key setup, there's a huge range of possibilities. It's not binary. Photographs don't have to be one or the other. You can pick and choose from different attributes of a high-key and low-key setup. Many times in advertising, we'll use a white background, but we'll use some lower-key lighting with shadow to one side. So it's really up to you to make the recipe for your lighting to your taste. I'm going to get one more frame. We see big catch lights in her eyes and multiple catch lights in her eyes. It's really a nice way to shoot people. Now I'd like to talk about something that's kind of an adjunct to lighting, and it's very important to your portrait lighting, and that is picking out the right wardrobe for your subject. Now, I think making the right portrait requires not only the right lighting and the right camera equipment, but also the right wardrobe. And really, it's got to be a collaboration. So when you pick up the portrait session, you're going to pick clothing, and that's not going to work at all. So you need to go find me some solid colors and some subdued colors, and we'll try again. The reason I didn't like the dress that Victoria was wearing is it had so much contrast. It had stark white and it had black. I don't know what kind of lighting situation I would put that in, except maybe a fashion shoot where that would make sense for a portrait. Your eye's going to be drawn to the white spaces, and the camera is going to see that black and white together, and it's almost going to create a little zebra effect when you look at it. So let's see what Victoria's got for us this time. Much better. Muted colors, perfect for skin tone. Over there a little bit. Perfect for skin tone. That's fabulous. Turn a little bit into the light. Okay, so it's a beautiful dress. It works well. It doesn't jar. There aren't a lot of contrast differences that would draw your eye to the dress instead of to her face. So let's go ahead and take a photograph of this dress and see how it looks in camera. Great. That's great right there. Turn toward the light a little bit, Victoria. That's fabulous. Perfect right there. And we'll get that in focus. Beautiful. Notice we've got kind of a modified short lighting going on, which is really nice. What I'm seeing here in the camera is no conflict between dark and light, no conflict anywhere on that dress, and not such a strong color that your eye is drawn toward it. The other thing is that some deeper colors, some richer colors, have the tendency to take the light and bounce it back up under the chin and cause some lighting issues by making a color under there that's hard to get back out. So this dress is fabulous for Victoria. The lighting is perfect. Her face looks great. It's pretty harmonious. So one more like that. Victoria, can you hold up the next shirt that you've got there? Let's talk about that for a second. The color's really nice, and it looks good with her hair, but the issue that I have with a color that's that bold and that strong is that a lot of times when we shoot it, you get that kick I was talking about, where you get that fuchsia color or that warm color right under her chin. I'm going to take a shot, even hold it up a little tighter like you'd be wearing it. I'm going to take a shot and let's see what it looks like on our camera. Okay, I can already see right under the bottom of her chin a nice bright magenta spot that's kind of a reflection from that shirt. So I would probably not use that shirt unless I were going for an effect that really required a lot of saturation in the color. Let's see what else you have there. Ah, that's a nice green. It's perhaps a little bit more saturated than I'd like. The dress she has on is perfect for me. That particular blouse, though, isn't unmanageable. The color that would kick back up wouldn't be as glaring as a really bright saturated color like the earlier fuchsia or magenta blouse. The only thing I would question there is the little sparkles on the collar. It might be really fashionable right now, but if you're planning on having this photograph in your house or on your desk for a while, that might seem a little old-fashioned 2 or 3 years down the road. But I like the sparkles, and I'm pretty sure Victoria can pull that one off. Now, I would also like to look at the last shirt there. I mentioned this when we talked about low-key lighting. That's a fabulous shirt. It looks good on her, and the black is a perfect component for our low-key lighting. So I think everybody should have a black turtleneck in their wardrobe, so whenever they get called on to do a low-key portrait, they're prepared, because that is the perfect shirt for that. Since it's black, it's color neutral. There's no kick coming up that'll change the coloration in her face, so we're miles ahead on that score. This is basically a great wardrobe. Now, when you're doing work like this and you're doing portraits, it's great for you to ask the person who's coming in to have their portrait done to bring a whole bunch of different costumes. I would love to have somebody bring 10 or 15 different costumes that they like. We can look at them, we can share our ideas about them, and we can match them to the light that we're creating. And I think that's vitally important. So really it is a collaboration between the photographer and the subject when it comes to clothing and wardrobe, because they are a component of what our lighting style is all about. We've gone through the principles of lighting, and we've seen how wardrobe choices affect the aesthetics of a portrait. What I'd like to do now is put all that together and set up and shoot 3 of the most commonly requested portraits we get. And that would be the business portrait, senior portraits, and what I call fine art portraits. So we've talked about high-key and low-key lighting. We've talked about wardrobe. What I'd like to do now is talk about the 3 most popular portrait styles that we get asked to do, and that most portrait photographers are asked to do. One would be senior portraits, another would be corporate portraits, and then our own fine art approach to portraiture. And what I'd like to look at is the lighting, and then also posing, because posing is a very integral part of the whole portrait experience. So what we've got set up here is the way I'd like to shoot a senior portrait. Now, a lot of senior portraits are done outside, but some are still done in the studios, and the studio will give you a lot more control over lighting, backgrounds, and your model. It's horrible to try to shoot senior portraits in Texas in the middle of August outside when it's 108 degrees and your model is sweating profusely. So a little studio time actually is good. We've got Victoria here on set. She's wearing some great wardrobe. That's pretty indicative of what a senior high school girl would wear. And we've got our big soft light, our 6-foot by 6-foot diffusion scrim, and we've got it canted at a slight angle, so it's coming to basically go across her face before it reaches the rest of her. Her face is the focal point of the whole photograph, but the light is very soft. Now to the other side, I've got a black light blocker. It's just a piece of fabric because I want to subtract some of the light that's bouncing off the white wall. And when I look at it, I think to myself, wow, that could be back just a little bit, so I'm going to fix that. And just put it back a little bit. So I think that's great. Now the next thing I need to do, since I've got my lighting just right, and I want to double check that in camera, is figure out how to pose Victoria. Now people never look good straight on into camera. So go ahead and give us straight shoulders into camera like that. It makes them look boxy, it makes them look wider, and it accentuates their body more than their face. So what I'd like to do is turn Victoria into the light. That way we utilize our short lighting on her face. So we get this beautiful, beautiful sculpting of her cheek on the right-hand side of the frame. Looks perfect. We've got big catch lights in her eyes. Looks very dynamic. Now, I'd like for you to just put a little bit more weight on your back foot and stick your front foot a little forward. Yeah, that gives her body a little bit of curve. Now turn your shoulders back towards us slightly. So you rotate right there. That's beautiful. Good posture in your back. Stand up really straight. Right there is gorgeous. And then that winning smile. Take your left arm and just pull it back a little bit. Bend at the elbow and go back right there. What we're trying to do is break up the body line right there. If she leaves her arm right next to her side, go ahead and let it drop back down. That just adds to the width of our subject. If we pull the elbow up, we see that beautiful waistline, and it's much more flattering. So these little steps of turning a little bit, doing a little S-curve, getting that arm out there, are all ways to both slenderize a model or a subject, but also make them look elegant and make them look graceful at the same time. So the last thing we have to do is get her head position just right. She's very beautiful there, but I'd like for her to turn her face a little bit more toward camera and a tiny little tilt to your head like other direction, right there, and chin up just a scooch. That's beautiful. Now we can see that smile. Bring your head back over here. Pull that arm out just a little bit. It's beautiful. Now, your hand that's on your hip, let's go ahead and just relax it a little bit and turn it sideways like this. Other way. Keep turning. Yeah, I just want it to go down a little bit and be flat. So, yeah, that's beautiful right there. We don't want to see a hand become a fist because it looks bulky to the camera. So we want to turn it a little bit. Go ahead and pull that hand out a little bit so it's almost to the hip, right there, fingers together. Yes, just like that. And then she can just play in front of the camera and do whatever seniors like to do when they have their portraits taken, which is mostly smile and giggle at themselves, which is great. Don't forget to turn into the light a little bit. You can bring that arm back up the way you had it. That's perfect right there. Face into camera a little bit more. I like your body position. That's great. And that's a beautiful senior portrait. That's how we pose them. That's how we light them. So sometimes high school kids have, well, goofy ideas. Victoria wants to be a biology major. She found a skeleton in the studio. Why we have a skeleton in the studio, I have no clue. But she thought she would like to have her picture taken with that, and we're ready to accommodate her. Notice that the skeleton is turned slightly to the light to slim him down a little bit, and it just looks fabulous. The only thing is I would like him to turn his head towards us, but as long as Victoria is looking into the camera, I think we've got it. That's beautiful, right there. Another very common request, as far as portraits go, is a request for a business portrait or business headshot. So we do a lot of these, and we try to keep the light as simple as possible. A lot of times we're doing this on a client's location, so we need to carry in all the materials, the light stands, the lights, any sort of modifiers that we're going to use, even a posing stool. So we want to keep things as simple as possible. And business portraits are usually done by or for people who are very, very busy and only want to spend 5 or 10 minutes in front of the camera. So we've put together a basic look for business people that seems to work 99.9% of the time. We start with one big light, a 4x4 in this case, but you could use a softbox or an umbrella in that position. You can use flash or continuous light. Doesn't really matter as long as it's 45 degrees up, 45-degree angle, and you're putting that beautiful little magic triangle on the far side of your client's face or your subject's face. It would be on the left-hand side of our frame, on that side of our face. So if you look at the setup, I've also got a little net or a little blocker screen to one side. That's because a lot of people wear white shirts or white blouses when they come and have their business headshots done. And if we don't block some of the light hitting the nearest shoulder, we tend to get some burnout where instead of white with texture, it goes to white without texture. And once it burns out, it's hard to correct. Now our fill light is very simple. It's the foam core we've been using all through the class. It's about a 3 foot by 4 foot piece of foam core on a stand. I'm using it nice and close to fill in. And the last component is the light that we've got on our background. It's a little slice that we're using, just a small background light to produce. Oh, I forgot we do have a hair light in there. We always put the hair light in with dark-haired people to get that separation between foreground and background. If somebody's bald or has really blonde hair, I'll forego the hair light because it burns out on blonde people and it leaves a specular highlight on people who have no hair. So that one's optional in those situations. This is my basic setup. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4 light setup system. The fourth light, of course, being the foam core. Now let's take a shot and see how this looks with Victoria. That's a good pose right there. Posture, chin up, nice and strong. Okay, I'm looking at this shoulder. I've got a lot of detail in it, so our little screen is working very well. Her posture's great. That's keeping wrinkles out of her shirt. The light is beautiful across her face. We're getting our nice little magic triangle over on this side of her face. The hair light's working perfectly. Our slash adds a little bit of drama, and I've made that slash of light on the background just a little bit blue to give it even a little bit more separation from what's going on in the foreground. This is my basic setup for a business portrait, a corporate portrait, or a headshot that you're going to use on LinkedIn or Facebook, something like that. I should also tell you that I'm using a little apple box or a little wooden box down under her feet, and that's to get her feet up so that she has the right posture. A lot of times people's feet are dangling if a bench is too high or a chair is too high, and this just gives them something to anchor to. This is my basic business headshot lighting, and a couple adaptations of this might be to make the fill light on the shadow side a little bit less filled in. If somebody has a wider face, I might want a shadow that's a little bit darker. I can show you what that looks like right now. First, I'm going to take a frame that's what we've got set up. And now I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to move the fill light back just a little bit away from Victoria. And you'll be able to see on our sample that nothing else has changed except for the shadows. They've become a little bit more dramatic. So if she had a wider face and I was trying to make it look thinner and more narrow, I might pull that fill light back a little bit. But really I liked where it was for Victoria. It's a nice fill. Sticking it back in. Once you've got your lighting set up, you need to position and pose just like you would any other portrait. I've got her legs turned over toward the main light side. That's giving me a little bit of an S-curve to her body. I've got her shoulders coming back. That looks nice and strong. Her head is up, her chin is up, so that it looks like a very competent and knowledgeable person. And for me, that's the perfect business portrait. This is the last of our 3 setups. This is what I call the artistic portrait, and this basically is a reflection of what I really like to do as a portrait photographer. And what I'm going to show you right now is basically the lighting style I like, that's part of my signature style, the way we build a rapport with our model, and just how we work through a shoot like that. Let me take a second to talk about building rapport and how our studio is when we do something like a fine art portrait. I like as little stuff going on in the studio as possible. The phones are always off, there are no interruptions, we have as few people in the studio as possible, sometimes just our makeup person and our photo subject. And we like to work with kind of an open-ended time schedule. So we can't rush this because what we're trying to do is build and look and build and look until we find the position that our model or our subject looks the best in. And that's a collaboration. And you build the collaboration by spending time with each other. So I have Victoria in my favorite lighting. It's a giant 6-foot by 6-foot diffusion scrim, which you've seen before. I've got it in as close as I can get it to her. There's just a very small background light throwing a little bit of light onto my gray background. Now in post-production I'll probably come back in and darken down the edges of that background to put even more attention on Victoria. And then I've got a black blocker to the other side, to the right-hand side of the frame, and that black blocker is there to do some negative fill, which we talked about. So I'm pulling some light out of those shadows to give the photo a little bit more drama. When I'm working with something like a 6-foot by 6-foot diffuser, I've already got enough light wrapping in there to show me detail in the hair on most of the shadow side of her face that the camera can see. So I really don't need more light coming off one of the walls to help me. Now I'm going to turn around and look through the camera and see what Victoria is up to. I'm positioning her so that she's got a really nice short light. So Victoria, that's great. I want you to lean just like that. Turn your face towards, yeah, that's beautiful right there. Hold that. Now you may notice that I keep telling Victoria to hold it. A lot of people have the tendency after the shutter goes off or the flash goes off to move into a different pose. It's something I think we learned from television. They show fashion shows or something and people are constantly moving and being frenetic. But when you're trying to craft a really beautiful portrait, what you're doing is trying to put somebody into the right spot and then fine-tune. So if they keep moving their head around or they keep moving their posture, you've got to bring them back and fine-tune all over again. I like to tell my models, please hold when I ask you to hold, and we'll just make little adjustments. And that's a great way to build your portrait, because you may see things as they're static, like maybe a catch light in the wrong place or a shadow that could be made better. And one little suggestion could help you bring that into kind of perfect harmony with the frame. So I've got her in a spot that I really like. I'm going to have her turn her face just a little toward camera to get that little triangle, that Rembrandt patch. So you see that I've got her turned to the side, and it's kind of an extension of what we looked at on some of our earlier portraits. That turn to the side is slimming, and it shows off her face more than her body, which is what we want. We want the emphasis on her expression and the rapport that we're getting through the lens. I think it's pretty vital. Also, that lean is very relaxing, and she gets into kind of a relaxed position that makes her, I guess, more accessible or more receptive to our suggestions about where she needs to be. So let me try just a few more like this, and we'll see if we can't fine-tune it even a bit more. That's beautiful. So I've got my really large 6x6 foot diffusion scrim, a little hair light coming across just to separate her with her dark hair, my black panel, I've got a little light on the floor and it is tucked way down in terms of its level. And it's very subtle, especially on the left side of the frame coming out to the other side. I want a darker area juxtaposed next to the light side of her face, and that works really well compositionally. So when we've got her in there in that position, we're also working with diagonals in our composition. And that creates a little bit more tension. It's a little bit more interesting than a static frame or a centered frame. Love to introduce diagonals, especially where people are concerned. Now I might pull back a little bit because I love what she's doing with her hands, and I want to include more of her hands into my shot. So I'm just going to move my camera back a little bit. I'm going to recomp and refocus. Turn your top hand to the side a little bit. That one. Turn it so I'm seeing this edge of your hand. A little bit more. Yes, that's great with your fingers right there. This is good on your face. And that's where I like to go for a fine art portrait. I think it's absolutely beautiful. What I'm seeing is a nice gradation around the background from my background light. I'm seeing beautiful soft light, nice shadow transitions on her face, and everything else is exactly what I want. And that's one of the things that we should talk about in portraiture. I think a lot of people are misinformed about one thing, that there's maybe a formula or a set of rules that you have to use when you're making portraits of subjects. And the reality is that the more you differentiate your style from everyone else's, the more it becomes your art, something that's an expression of yours. Following the rules just makes you a commodity, and it makes your work look like everyone else's. Now there are basics like short lighting and broad lighting, or high key and low key, but those are just fundamental building blocks of making a portrait. You really need to come up with your own recipes, and I would love to see what you come up with. So if you could share with us on the Craftsy platform, we can all learn together about portrait lighting. I've been doing it for a long time, but many times over the course of the last 2 months, I've seen other work that inspires me to try new things and go in new directions. You never stop learning as a portrait photographer, whether it's about the lighting, the color, or how to build a rapport with different people. It's really a great thing to do. I hope you're enjoying it. Thanks. One more. That's perfect right there. Thank you for joining me here at Craftsy as we learned about how to make portraits with Studio Portrait Lighting. I had a great time here. I hope you did as well. And I hope you'll share with us and go out there and have fun and do portraits your way. That's what makes it art.